Good morning, colleagues. We will be starting in about 2 minutes, so I invite you all to please go ahead, take your seats. Those of you who may be outside, please join us in here so we can get this on the way. Thank you. Okay, good morning again, colleagues. We're going to begin. Our first order of business is going to be the national anthem. So I ask that once we're able, we please stand for the playing of the national anthem. Thank you. Please be seated. I will invite our CTD, Mr. Yannick Watson, to offer a word of prayer.
Good morning. Let us bow our heads for prayer. Lord, you have blessed us with a beautiful island, an island where water flows abundantly from the mountains through the forest and onto our plains. Today, we celebrate Groundwater and World Water Day. We're asking for your guidance as we go through today. You have helped us to protect this resource. You gave it to us because you know that water is life. We want you to pull us a bit closer, to encourage us in our minds and our thoughts so that we may be more responsible and may be more appreciative of this resource. Lord, continue to bless and protect us. Open our minds as we go through today, that we may learn and we may have more to offer in terms of protecting water and to ensure that we have full access to the water that you have given us and the life that you have given us through the use of water. Thank you for all of the mercies. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, CTD. Good morning again, colleagues. I have the honor of guiding you through today's proceedings. But before I tell you a little bit about myself, I would like to observe some protocols. So, Honorable Minister, Senator Matthew Samuda, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, Opposition Spokesperson on Land, Environment, and Climate Change. Chairwoman, Board of Directors of the Water Resources Authority, Dr. Nadine Spence. Mr. Peter Clark, Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority. Mr. Mark Barnett, President of the National Water Commission. Mr. Audley Thompson, Managing Director, Rural Water Supply Limited. Mr. Joseph Giles, Chief Executive Officer of the National Irrigation Commission, and I do apologize, I got this a little out of order. Mr. Yannick Watson, Chief Technical Director, with responsibility for land, environment, and climate change in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for those of you who have been able to join us in person. I know we also have a virtual audience, so thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate you taking the time. So today is, as our CTD mentioned in his prayer, World Water Day. And the theme today focuses on groundwater. Specifically, it focuses on groundwater making the invisible visible. And to share a little bit about the importance of groundwater, first off, there is the difference between groundwater and surface water. So surface water is what we're going to see when we're driving along, when we're driving over our various bridges, etc., and that water is very evident and apparent on the surface. Or groundwater is what may not necessarily be visible to us. It's underground. So groundwater is actually the most important of our island's water resources, as I understand it. It's 84% of our available water resource, and 92% of the water that we produce for domestic use is from groundwater, or from springs, which would be the surface expression of groundwater. Groundwater contributes to the flow of some of the major rivers in our island. It's the contribution from groundwater that actually allows these rivers to maintain their flow during the drier periods. So some of the rivers that we know that are groundwater fed include the Rio Cobre, the Milk River, White River, Duns River. Across the island, there is a great deal of interaction between both surface and groundwater. Groundwater rises as springs to become surface waters in rivers, and then these rivers then sink to become groundwater. Some of the rivers that sink to become groundwater include the Rio Minho, the Cave River in St. Anne and Clarendon, Quashies River in Trelawney. So groundwater truly is the most significant of Jamaica's water resources. And this resource has several features that actually make it more attractive to develop as a source for domestic water versus surface water. Some of these include generally being of better quality, being more reliable in terms of less prone to drought than surface water resources. The cost of development of groundwater sources requires less capital and infrastructural work than a surface water system, and groundwater storage utilizes less land space than surface water reservoirs. So as we move into the next section of our program, where I will ask a few persons to bring greetings, I will leave you with a brief introduction of who I am. I'm Alison Rangolan. I'm the Chief Technical Director at the Environmental Foundation. I am also a director on the board of the Water Resources Authority, which is how I got into this position today. And I am now going to ask, in this order, that CTD Mr. Yannick Watson, followed by Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, followed by Dr. Nadine Spence, please bring greetings to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning again. I would heed to the established protocol, and would like to just welcome everyone here. Today is indeed a very special day. I'll bring greetings on behalf of Permanent Secretary Audrey Sewell, who is not able to make it here today. As somebody who is steeped in water, going back from hydrology to water resource management, a student, yes, Mark, a student of water, and a lecturer of hydrology myself. I'm happy that today we are here to speak about groundwater. And it's a very important step in the hydrological cycle. It's that step that involves the transfer of water from one point to another across the surface of the earth. Before it gets there, we have what is called through flow, right? And we have the intertwining processes of capillary action and many different activities that takes place that we don't see. But what is important is that even though we have groundwater, we have surface water flow, the world water balance remains the same. We don't get less water, we don't have less water, we don't get more water. So it's important in terms of how we manage water. I just want to get that out there. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this World Water Day Forum as we join with countries around the world to commemorate World Water Day 2022 under the theme Groundwater, Making the Invisible Visible. Groundwater, though invisible, but its impact is visible everywhere, as we can see. Out of sight, under our feet, groundwater is a hidden treasure that enriches our lives. While it may be out of sight, it must not be out of our mind. It plays a vital role in water, sanitation systems, agriculture, industry, ecosystems, and climate change adoption. As our population grows, so does the demand for fresh water. This has placed our resources under increased threat from industrial, agricultural, and domestic pollution. The effects of drought and floods, wastage and exploitation of our vulnerable ecosystems. There are but a few hazards to our freshwater sources that demand immediate attention and call for a serious shift in our thinking as we move to address them. Ladies and gentlemen, we all have a role to play in protecting and managing our water resources. We must work together to reduce the impact of pollution, the over-abstraction of water resources, particularly groundwater. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and its agencies are committed to managing and protecting Jamaica's water resources through continued implementation of the water sector policy and to ensure that all Jamaicans will have universal access to potable water and adequate sanitation by 2030. Important to the implementation of the policy is the need for broad-based consultation amongst stakeholders. As the driver of the policy, the Ministry has established the Integrated Water Resources Management Council, which is a multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral body that facilitates consultation among key stakeholders for matters relating to the protection and management of our water and water-related resources. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge us all to play our part in ensuring that our resources are protected for generations to come. I am imploring all Jamaicans to desist from throwing garbage and other forms of waste into our rivers and gullies. Conserve water by turning off taps when not in use, and where necessary and perhaps very important, to harvest rainwater to augment piped water supply. I wish for you an informative and productive forum. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Minister, the Honorable Matthew Samuda, my colleague and friend, Mr. Peter Clark, Mr. Mark Barnett, Madam Moderator, Yannick, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me apologize on behalf of Member of Parliament Luthan Cousins, who really is the spokesperson on water, but he actually has a joint select committee this morning for which he has to attend. And so hands were laid on me suddenly to say a few words on his behalf. And I'll be the first to say that I do not speak on water. I speak on the environment, land, and climate change. So I crave your understanding if I enter upon a subject matter for which I have absolutely no knowledge. But I am very happy to be here, Minister, and ladies and gentlemen, and wish on behalf of the opposition and certainly MP Cousins to congratulate the Water Resources Authority on the launch of their master plan on this very important day. The master plan, from my very preliminary reading of it, or what I've seen about it, really shows that, in fact, Mr. Clark, due consideration was given for the long-term planning and ensure that water is available to all Jamaicans. And this is important because a lot of things have happened in the last decade, particularly as it relates to climate change and how that will impact water availability, and in particular, groundwater. There is no doubt that climate change will and has been impacting water availability and water supply. And we have seen this in so many different ways. The fact is, and the experts will tell you, that notwithstanding the longer rainfall and the more intense rainfall, there are often times when our groundwater is still not impacted positively, but rather the country is impacted negatively, all because of climate change. And therefore, there is no doubt that any discussion that is had must factor climate change, the impact of climate change, and its availability to water. The link between our forest and groundwater is undeniable, and as such, forest management, conservation, and restoration is vital to groundwater conservation. The destruction of our forest resources proves an unequivocal threat to groundwater supply. And therefore, as a country, we must do everything to protect our natural resources, which produces over 40% of our country's fresh water. It is so important, and the speaker before me, Yannick, spoke about rainwater harvesting. It is so important that as a country, more is done to ensure that we harvest rainwater. Another country that I have an affiliation to in St. Kitts Nevis, I'm always, the first time I saw it, I was very impressed, and I continue to be impressed with the fact that almost every house has what they call a cistern, what we would call a tank, and they allow for that. In the country where I am from, in St. Anne, almost every house has what we call a gutter. So the water rains and then you have your tank, and so you catch that. It is something that we must ensure that all Jamaicans be a part of and start doing. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate World Water Day, we again want to congratulate the Water Resources Authority for the crucial role it plays in supporting the country's water supply. May you, sir, and your team continue to grow from strength to strength, and we pray that the objectives outlined in your master plan will be realized and realized well. I believe that through the work of the Water Resources Authority, you have in fact been given action and credibility to this year's theme, which is making the invisible visible. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Honorable Minister Matthew Samuda, Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, CTD Chief Technical Director Mr. Yannick Watson, Managing Director Mr. Peter Clark of the WRA, and President of the NWC Mr. Mark Barnett, Director of the Rural Water Supply Mr. Audley Thompson, Mr. Joseph Giles, CEO of the NIC, and of course, Director of the WRA Board, and our moderator this morning, Ms. Alison Rangalan. Good morning to all of you and to all our guests. I am indeed honored to be able to speak to you today in my capacity as the chairwoman of the board of the Water Resources Authority. On this, let me remove my mask. I think I'm social distancing enough. Whew, I'm breathing better. On this World Water Day, we reflect on the theme for the day, groundwater, making the invisible visible. The day is observed to bring attention to fresh water. This year we are asked to raise awareness, bring attention, and do what is necessary to protect our groundwater resources. Water is, of course, a resource that we all need, but today we are asked to focus on the fact that our groundwater supply is dwindling. We are also asked to focus on the billions of people globally who do not have access to safe water. Now, as we deliberate this morning into this afternoon, I ask that we contemplate our options and our location in relation to the idea that the world is facing a global water crisis. The Water Resources Authority affirms every day that every drop of our water is precious. If we all agree with the WRA that every drop of our water is precious, then we have to do so much more to ensure that we are not over-exploiting and therefore jeopardizing our underground water supply. We must remember that water is not a finite resource, and we need to do more to bring attention, to make visible the tremendous amount of work that is needed to protect this precious commodity. There are some facts that this day makes visible. One is that there are concerns that there is an over-reliance on groundwater. In Jamaica, 84% of our water is underground, and 92% of the water we use for domestic purposes comes from underground sources. And I just want to say here that what it means that the big player in water in Jamaica is who? Not NWC. Mark. Because Mark has to come to us for water, right? So it's really the WRA. So just stating that publicly, I hope somebody from the press is here. Like me, I expect that the question on your minds is this statement true for Jamaica? Are we over-relying on our underground water sources? Are we doing enough to protect our underground water resources? And perhaps most importantly, what are we doing to put these resources at risk? And finally, what can we do to ensure that we are engaged in behavior that protects and sustains this resource? Each day, the men and women at the WRA concern themselves with these questions and more as they deliberate, strategize, and take action to ensure that our water resources are visible so that we can take the necessary action for its protection. This is why we can launch the Water Resources Master Plan today, because of their tireless and meticulous effort at tracking, recording, and monitoring our underground water supply. And they make the invisible visible each day. And I want us to just acknowledge the team at the Water Resources Authority. I want them to stand, and so that we can just applaud their efforts at making sure that we have a water resource master plan that we can look at and celebrate today. So the WRA team who've been doing the work at making the invisible visible so that we can today talk about really knowing what is there in respect of our water resources. This is an important moment in our history as a nation. And as we deliberate on the information in the master plan, we are reminded that this information is critical to realizing the invocation, the call to action of today's theme, and the focus of this year's observation for World Water Day. I look forward to the deliberations, but more than anything else, I look forward to the solutions and ideas that will come as we share ideas on what is necessary to make the invisible visible as it relates to Jamaica's groundwater. Thank you all very much for being here today, and I hope that this engagement will be a fulfilling one for all of you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers for bringing greetings to us. I think everyone has certainly given us some food for thought and has further helped to set the stage for the proceedings that are going to follow. I invite you now to focus your attention on the screens as we are now going to have a presentation.
Did you know that right where we're standing right now, there are millions of gallons of water just below our feet? That's right. 84% of the water here in Jamaica is stored in aquifers. Aquifers are porous spaces below the ground where water is stored. Many Jamaicans are accustomed to reservoirs like the Mona Reservoir, where you could actually see the water stored above the ground. But most of Jamaica's water is actually stored in an aquifer below the ground. Increasing underground storage is just one of the strategies the government is using to help secure our water resources. The government invested $1 billion Jamaican dollars to construct the managed artificial recharge facility.
Located at Innswood Spanish Down, St. Catherine, the MAR is the only one of its kind in the Caribbean. Charged with the mandate to provide oversight for the water sector, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation provided oversight for the multi-agency team from the National Water Commission, the Water Resources Authority, the National Irrigation Commission, and the Rural Water Supply Limited.
The National Irrigation Commission Limited involvement in the managed artificial aquifer recharge system at Innswood took place in 3 phases: in the planning phase, in the implementation, that is construction, and now in the supply of water to the system.
Rural Water Supply Limited has been involved in all phases to date of this project. This additional water will allow us to more effectively fulfill our mandate, providing water infrastructure to the rural and unserved communities.
The MAR was built to receive approximately 5 million gallons of water per day from the Rio Cobre via the National Irrigation Commission's canals.
Behind me are the sluice gates. These gates are used to control the amount of water entering the MAR at any given time. Water flows from the sluice gate to a weir we can use to measure the volume of water, and then flows through a screen. The screen is the first point of purification. We remove bottles, papers, sticks, and twigs that might have been picked up from the river on its way here.
After leaving the sluice gate, the water is distributed to 4 settling ponds.
These are the settlement ponds. There are 4 in total. Here, fine silt, sand, and debris settles to the bottom of the ponds, and the water skims over to the top and heads over to the reef bed to be purified further. Here is the final point of purification. These are the vegetation beds. Here, excess nutrients is absorbed into the plants, and the purified water is then sent to be injected in the aquifer. Here is the final injection point. Purified water leaves the MAR and enters the aquifer via a network of sinkholes and wells, just like this one.
Globally, March 22 is celebrated as World Water Day, and this year, Jamaica joins the world in highlighting the importance of groundwater. But while the government of Jamaica is taking bold and creative moves, such as the MAR, to secure our groundwater, we need your help. Here's how you can help. Ensure that you dispose of all waste properly. Don't dump chemicals down drains or on the ground. Maintain your on-site septic systems. Leave space in your yards to allow water to percolate into the aquifer. Practice water conservation. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and the Water Resources Authority remain committed to ensuring Jamaica's water security for today and for future generations.
Thank you very much for that video. I've always heard about the managed artificial recharge, so it really was a treat for me to actually see it in action via that video. I am now going to hand over for our main address. I will ask our Minister, the Honorable Senator Matthew Samudo, to join us here at the podium. Thank you.
Madam Master of Ceremonies, thank you very much for your welcome. Even in her absence, I will acknowledge her. P.S. Sewell, CTD, please give her my regards. Dr. Spence, I think it's not quite professor yet, is it? But no. Doctor, so certainly Dr. Spence. Chairwoman of the Water Resources Authority, Mr. Mark Barnett, President of the National Water Commission, Mr. Peter Clark, Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, online viewers, I greet you well. Now, before I dive into the substance of the speech, allow me to also acknowledge my colleague and friend, Senator Fraser Binns. I would safely say that perhaps MP Cousins is in danger of being shuffled based on the presentation made here this morning. And I don't say that because I have any issue with MP Cousins. We actually get along particularly well, and we were discussing matters of water actually last week. But I think what is particularly interesting is that someone who I know to be an environmental warrior and someone who shares much of what I believe is necessary to be done for the environment is actually here on World Water Day because the relationship between environmental management and water management really can't be any closer than it is currently. And I think that is something that we're going to want to see continued, even in the distant future when my friend one day occupies this particular seat. But to the substance of why we're here, it is my pleasure to participate in the celebrations for World Water Day 2022. Although it is my first time participating as minister, I've always valued the importance of the preservation and conservation of our water resources, and I've sought to spread the word whenever and wherever I could. Water is, after all, part and parcel of the natural resources that we have been blessed with in Jamaica, and as much as possible, we should make every effort to preserve it. As the planet experiences global warming, the effects of climate change will be most evident through changes in rainfall patterns, increased temperatures, and prolonged drought. We are indeed already seeing this. Increased demand for water, coupled with rising incidence of droughts and floods, have created the urgent need to find new ways to protect and preserve our freshwater sources and to sustain the ecosystems that depend on them for survival. Key players within the water sector agree that collaboration and a unified approach is the best approach to protect and manage our water resources. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and our agencies are working assiduously to ensure the sustainable supply and distribution of our water through the implementation of various policies, projects, and initiatives that have either started or have been prioritized for the upcoming financial year. Notable among these are the continued implementation of the National Water Sector Policy, improvements to the potable water supply systems and service delivery in the corporate area, the completion of the 5-year non-revenue water reduction and control program for Kingston and St. Andrew, as well as the National Tree Planting Initiative. We are 1 million trees into our 3 million tree program, and I wish to also acknowledge the water stakeholders who took on the task of planting 200,000 trees, correct, Mark? 200,000, right? Or 2,000, I thought it was 200. You sure? We'll work at it, we'll work at it. 2,000 in a month, okay, we'll start there. No, but however, without adequate water sources, our efforts will be in vain. All of the water we harness, treat, and distribute comes from a source. As such, the efforts of the ministry and its agencies must go hand in hand with the efforts of all Jamaicans as we work to ensure the sustainability of our water sources. Every year, World Water Day focuses on the importance of water. This year's theme, Groundwater, Making the Invisible Visible, raises awareness about the critical importance of our groundwater sources. Groundwater supplies approximately 80% of Jamaica's water demands and represents 84% of the island's usable water and is paramount to the delivery of potable water to our citizens. In areas without access to piped or treated water, it is a reliable source even during times of drought due to the large amounts stored under the surface and may provide some amount of water security in a changing climate. Oftentimes, however, these benefits are undervalued and groundwater is often unsustainably used. In addition to our aquifers, are also subject to stressors from human activities such as the application of pesticides and fertilizers to crops, nitrites from animals, and human waste, mining activities, landfills, and other unsustainable practices. It is therefore encouraging that a year-long focus is being placed on groundwater by UNESCO, along with the International Groundwater Resources Assessment Center on behalf of UN Water. Ladies and gentlemen, the sustainable use and protection of our vital natural resource requires all of us to do our part. We must recycle, reuse, reduce, and conserve our water resources. It is precisely why I'm particularly proud and happy that in his budget presentation on Thursday, Most Honorable Prime Minister formally completed the process of protecting just over 78,000 hectares of the cockpit country, one of the areas that is a major source of our groundwater. And I wish to also here extend my thanks to the ministry team that would have worked on the project, and Peter and your team. I know you guys did a lot of work over the last 5 years to get it done. So I'd like to extend personal thanks to the WRA for their work in making this a reality. We must reduce the waste, both human and animal, that is likely to end up in our groundwater sources. We must reduce our carbon emissions that are likely to give rise to further climate change and its adverse impacts on our freshwater resources. We must conserve our use of water through practices such as rainwater harvesting. We must improve our water efficiency by installing water-saving fixtures and equipment and encouraging others to conserve. We must find the money for Mark and team to expand the non-revenue water program that has gone so well. It is absolutely critical to the future of the NWC and the sustainable future of Jamaica. We must protect our watersheds by planting and preserving trees. Ladies and gentlemen, clean, accessible water is essential to the health of communities and our nation. It is also critical to ecosystems and economic prosperity. I urge you to make today meaningful as we work to sustainably manage our water resources and improve the lives of all Jamaicans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I was remiss, and thank you for bringing it to my attention, Minister, in not offering an official apology for our permanent secretary in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Mrs. Audrey Sewell, earlier. So please let us take note of her official apology for not being able to join us today. Next on our agenda is going to be the actual launch of the National Water Resources Development Master Plan for Jamaica. So what I will do is I will ask the Minister, I will ask the Water Resources Authority Chairwoman to please come forward. I will ask the Water Resources Authority Managing Director, Mr. Peter Clark, and I will ask Mr. Yannick Watson, or CTD, to please come forward. And Senator, I'm putting you on notice that I will need you shortly. Senator Sophia Fraser-Benz, would you please step forward to join? And I'll trust the photographers to tell me when they're ready for us to move to the next section. All right, thank you very much. Thank you all. Okay, so we are actually, well, as you would have realized, we are running a little bit behind time, but I do think it's important to give us the opportunity to refresh ourselves. So we are now up on our coffee break. I will ask us to take 10 to 15 minutes to refresh ourselves. 10 minutes. I'm being told 10 minutes. Okay, it's 10 minutes to refresh ourselves and rejoin so that we can continue with the proceedings. Thank you very, very much for all of the participants in this first section of today's proceedings.
Mami.
Colleagues, we're coming up on that 10-minute mark, so we have another minute or two before we'll resume. Colleagues, we're about to resume. I'm inviting those of you who are still refreshing yourselves to go ahead, take what you need, and begin to head back to your seats, please. Colleagues, as we resume the session, we're going to be guided through an overview of the water policy by Ms. Andrea Spencer, who is the Director of Water Policy and Monitoring. Water Policy, my apologies, at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation.
Morning, everybody. Okay, so I'll give a brief outline of what I'll be presenting today. A brief introduction, principles guiding the policy measures or implementing agencies and regulators, or implementing agencies and regulators, and a brief conclusion. Now, the government of Jamaica's vision for the management of the water resources is guided by the government of Jamaica's Vision 2030 National Development Plan. The policy recognizes the critical role that water resources play in the realization of this vision. And we all know what the national vision is: Jamaica's place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. And we will therefore seek to manage the resources in a sustainable and integrated way. There are 6 principles guiding the policy: sustainability and intergenerational equity, efficiency, integrated water resources management, universal access, responsiveness to gender and vulnerable groups, and stakeholder participation. Sustainable and intergenerational equity. Now, water is a finite resource, so we need to protect, in the protection and its management, we need to make sure that we have enough to last this generation and in future generations. Efficiency. To provide water is costly, so we're encouraging our service providers to use energy-efficient technology, which will reduce the cost of providing water. Integrated water resources management. The management of water is everybody's business, not just for persons in the water sector. It's for the water sector, land, environment, and climate change. It's about strengthening partnerships in water. Our CTD made mention of the Integrated Water Resources Management Council, which has been established by the ministry. Responsiveness to gender and vulnerable groups. Now, this means that we're to think of everybody: the vulnerable, the elderly, children, women. Oftentimes, it's women who have to travel long distances for water. So when we're designing our water systems, we want to take gender into consideration. Stakeholder participation. Water is everybody's business, so we need the voice of everybody. So we're consulting with all. The policy outlines 12 measures that will be implemented by the government through its implementing agencies in order for us to protect water resources and provide universal access to water and potable water and adequate sanitation by 2030. There are 6 displayed on your screen. I'll go through them briefly. Climate change adaptation and mitigation. Now, we are well aware of the effects of climate change. Extreme weather conditions, prolonged drought. We need to make sure that our systems are robust enough to manage climate change. We need to make the water sector resilient to climate change. So what we need to do is mainstream climate change considerations into our plans, our policies, and our programs. Can our systems withstand long periods of drought? Those are the questions that we need to answer. We also need to raise the awareness of climate change and the effects of climate change. Drought management. We all know the detrimental effects of droughts. What are we encouraging us to do? Conserve water, reduce our consumption, reuse, reduce, and recycle where it's feasible to do so. Energy efficiency. We're encouraging service providers to adopt energy-efficient technologies which can reduce the cost of providing water. Additionally, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Flood water control and drainage. Now, we've had a lot of flooding incidents over the years. Damage to infrastructure, property, and sometimes loss of lives. The government is encouraging us. We're trying to reduce the effects of flood, keeping property damage as minimal as possible. Currently, the ministry is working to amend the Water Resources Act and the Flood Water Control Act. Irrigation services. Now, irrigated agriculture consumes a lot of our surface and groundwater. We're encouraging our farmers and our agricultural stakeholders to use energy-efficient technology that will reduce the cost of producing water. Monitoring and evaluation. Now, this is very important. How do we know where we are? Are we achieving our targets and in the timeline that we set? Monitoring and evaluation falls under the responsibility of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Private participation in the water sector. Now, private sector involvement has been effective in increasing the speed of development and delivering essential services. We have approximately 16 private service providers, and through an arrangement with the OUR and the government, they service small geographic areas. Standards, rainwater harvesting. We're promoting rainwater harvesting households and communities where there's adequate rainfall to do so. We are also promoting the rehabilitation of catchment tanks, and this falls under the purview of Rural Water Supply Limited and the municipal corporations. Standards for access to potable water supply and improved sanitation. Now, the policy has established about 5 standards when it comes to potable water supply and adequate sanitation. Water supply will be safe. That means it conforms to the standards set by the World Health Organization and the Ministry of Health. It's convenient, right? That means water supply will be delivered to the home or as close as possible. Which I mentioned safe earlier, of sufficient quality. Each person is entitled to at least 50 liters of potable water per day. Reliable. Water supply will be available on a predictable schedule and affordable. No one will be denied access to potable water because of an inability to pay. Service targets for sanitation include where sewage is not economically feasible, all new developments will have access to safe and environmentally friendly sanitation solutions. Cities and major towns will have sewage services provided by a utility company. Water supply in utility and non-utility service areas. Now, the policy divides the country into NUSAs, which is short for non-utility service area, and USAs, which is utility service areas. Now, utility service areas are areas where to provide piped water is the least cost method, as opposed to the NUSAs, where providing piped water is not the least cost method. In areas that are considered remote from piped systems or sparsely populated, these are serviced by the Rural Water Supply Limited or the municipal corporations. In the NUSAs, the National Water Commission is the main service provider. Wastewater management in USAs and NUSAs. All households will have access to improved sanitation that meets all the health standards, right, and that protects the environment. I mentioned earlier that in USAs, central sewage will be established in major towns, and all households in NUSAs will have exclusive sanitation facilities that protect the health and users of the environment. Now, our implementing agencies, the National Water Commission, Rural Water Supply Limited, National Irrigation Commission, National Works Agency, municipal corporations, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, Office of the Cabinet, the Forestry Department, ODPEM, and the National Solid Waste Management Authority. Our regulators include the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Office of the Utilities Regulation, National Environment and Planning Agency, and the Water Resources Authority. Now, we are committed to working closely with our key stakeholders. And please remember that the successful implementation of the policy depends on all of us, not just the water agencies, not just the land, but all of us. We need to all play our part. And in closing, we have copies of the policy available on CDs and flash drives at our booth on the outside, and there's no cost attached. So if you haven't taken a copy as yet, please take one before you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that overview of the water sector policy. I am now going to invite Mr. Mark Barnett to share some remarks with us. Mr. Barnett?
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Okay. So, I've been asked to speak on securing water supply for the future. Is that really NWC who's supposed to speak on that, or the RRA, really? Since it has been established that by Chair Lady Spence, that NWC must go to the RRA. So I am expecting that the RRA will have our future water supply needs. NWC will only take it and distribute it. So it's a kind of a fortuitous topic. But nonetheless, I think we all play an equal role in securing the livelihood, the health of our population, and even the sustenance of businesses, which also spur economic growth. So I'm going to go through quite quickly. I've been given a very short period of time. I don't know how we do that, because water is such an important topic that to give me 10 minutes is like telling me I need to do a sprint. I've doing that many years ago. So here we go. And this is just a quick overview of what the NWC does. And without reading anything from the slides, I'm just going to say, on average, we produce just about 75 or 1,000 meter cube of water, just about 180 million gallons of water per day. And our intention is to really serve about 85% of Jamaica's population, and it's really centered, as the presentation before says, utility service areas, which really NWC, for those who know, was established to be not just only the primary water supply entity for the government, but it's supposed to be operating at a profit. And so, in extending yourself across, or not profit in some respect, but surplus, let me put it in that context, because profit can give you a kind of a different view. But a surplus where we could then reinvest and do other things to help other communities. But that has not happened. So we heard this story. We have just about 162 wells, of course. All are licensed with the RRA. And did you know that we have to pay the RRA some fees every year, annual abstraction fees? I'm just going to rub it in. So NWC cost never ends. We operate from rivers and springs, as usual, about 263 of those. Our network of pipeline of varying sizes, from 1 inch all up to 33 inches, is over 10,000 kilometers. And you can understand the extent of what we do. Certainly, this may be something that we plagiarize from the RRA, but we are partners. And so, as it is, most of our water resources are on the north. Most of our economic activities, agriculture, commercial activities, except for tourism, which is on the north. The others are on the south. So your greatest water demand, of course, is on the south. And this is just to give a depiction of where the demand is. And of course, spatially, both in terms of where people live, work, and do business, in relation to the spatial distribution of the sources, that's where the challenge is in relation to providing the service. So what are some of the risks? And it has been said before. So if I'm actually going to sustain water supply for the future, we must address all of these things. And we can't address them sequentially. They must all be addressed simultaneously to actually preserve what we consider the pristine water resources that Jamaica produce. Pollution is a problem, not just by virtue of solid waste, but pollution in the liquid form. We heard of fertilizers and the residue from those activities. But in NWC business, we also are concerned about septic tank absorption pits, which for most of us is a huge problem. Where we sit or where we're standing now, it's an aquifer, and we're not able to utilize not even 50% of the water resources under this aquifer. So you may ask yourself why, and I'm sure that question always come about, but we can discuss that in another forum. So over abstraction, I do believe we may have had that exercise in recent times, but with the improved monitoring of the RRA, that is geared towards reducing over abstraction of the wells. And again, part of the stipulation is to ensure that most, if not all, our facilities have production meters which have to be reported to the RRA on a regular basis. Again, climate change. And you ask the question, how does climate change affect NWC? But the obvious one is what happens in the watershed. The other thing is you have higher temperatures, you have lower rainfall periods, higher rainfall intensity, so you have a little bit more flash flooding, and you have less percolation in the soil underground. It's actually going to affect your water resource. It will actually affect your stream flows, that is your rivers, etc. Because again, when you have things happening in your watershed that resulted in high siltation, it affects your ability to treat, process water. You can't build a treatment plant to deal with a turbidity of 3,000 plus NTU. You'll then ask me, why do I spend so much money for that facility? So you build a treatment plant where your normal NTU is at a certain level. Sorry that I went into some technical jargon there. So, I hope you can read this. What do we need to do? You know, it's fortuitous that my first item speaks to aquifer recharge. And I heard all the pomp and pageantry about the St. Catherine Aquifer Recharge. But as the president of NWC, on the zoo's auspices, that project was executed. I'm going to invoke ownership, CTD, because NWC still carries the weight or the burden of the loan that actually financed that very valuable, and I must say, very valuable project. And you know, it speaks to the unselfishness of the NWC in helping to preserve our water resources. And it really is, even when we don't have it. And yes, Peter, yes, Sir Giles, I don't know why they put all the water people. When I can't pay you your bills, this is what I'm paying for. and the fact is, we recognize the importance of the Ryacobre, remind me of the name. Yeah, but it is also part of when your predecessor, Basil Fernandez, was there. It was a mandate on the NWC to establish some form of recycled water system so that we could utilize more of the water in the entire Spanish Town area. So we're talking about Oregon Harbor Well, we talk about Friendship Well, and all of those other wells. So we are proud to not just be the pioneer that established this aquifer recharge system, but we are also proud to be able to give it to my sister agencies free of cost to manage. So NWC in its whole challenges is able to be charitable to all of you. Interestingly, you know, water treatment plant rehabilitation is another area that we believe is a mitigating strategy because, again, if you have your systems that are able to treat whatever the quality of what you're taking in to potable standard, you would have been securing that on the output side. But I also believe the importance is on the input side. How do you ensure the resource itself is protected? Again, our burden is not light. And we are in the time of Lent. And oftentimes, as you know, for those of you who goes to church, you know, the Lord was given the cross. And he alone couldn't carry it because he was beaten. And so all my colleagues here oftentimes, you know, beat up on the NWC without recognizing the burden of the cross that we have to bear. And so when we look at wastewater systems, and if those of you who are aware, our wastewater systems are predominantly established to treat wastewater from discrete housing schemes. I mean, apart from downtown Kingston, which historically had a central system, when you go outside of the corporate area, the systems were developed for housing development. Portmore is just one of them. Although it is the highest concentration of wastewater of sewer connection as it is now, but it was predominantly developed for the houses. Likewise, other communities in St. Catherine, Clarendon, St. Thomas, wherever. It was in the late 80s, 90s, thereabout, I think, when we started to look at, and because of pressures as well, when government started to look at central wastewater system, there comes Negril, Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, and we have now just completed Portland about 2 years ago. So if we're looking at preserving our water resources, we have to take care of the waste that is generated. And oftentimes, we always say, it's not my business, but it is everybody's business. Importantly, and this is a controversial topic, and I have no challenge in speaking about it, we must expand our sewer network wherever we are. We speak about how do we make the invisible visible. This is critical to make that invisible water visible. If we don't do that, it will forever be invisible, and we then are forced to do high-cost water production. Well, hopefully, technologies will allow us to get it cheaper. But I can share a story with you. NWC have resisted putting in desalination facilities just because it is the buzzword at the time. Reason being, when you're paying 33 US cents per kilowatt hour for energy, and when you have a network of over 100 years in some instances, or up to 50 years in other places, and you're losing upwards of 50% of the water that you produce, tell me which business is going to invest in something that is going to cost you more than what you can collect from what you produce. So it was really going into what we call a dark hole. We couldn't go there. Now things have changed. It offers a more opportunity for us to look at that. But, interestingly, we could build as much treatment facilities as we wish if there is no concerted effort to tackle and reduce non-revenue water. We're going to be in the same place 10 years after we build a new facility. For NWC's perspective, our strategic goal priority is to reduce non-revenue water. We have had successes in Kingston. During that period, we were able to reduce our input volume into the system. We were putting in just about 220,000 cubic meters per month. We brought it down to just about 165,000 cubic meters per day. What that means, in reality, is that I'm reducing the amount of water I put into the network equal to what both Constance Spring and Mona treatment plant would have been produced on a daily basis. So that's success, and I don't need anybody else to tell me that. We were able to increase service reliability from 18 hours to 23.5 hours. And we reduced our NRW from just about 120,000 cubic meters per day down to about 70, thereabout, cubic meters per day. It simply means, in essence, when we started the project, and this is not on the slide, it's all in my head. Sorry that I'm just rolling it out. When we started the project, every connection, and what we mean by connection, every water supply connection, when we assessed it, was losing over 1,000 liters per day. On completion of that project, we were down to just about 460 liters per connection per day. It's an emphasis that it's something that we must emphasize, because what it in essence doing, reduce less abstraction from the sources, and we are more efficiently distributing and utilizing less water to the same population. And I'm sure in the question and answer section you're going to ask, how are we going to make the invisible visible? How are we going to secure water resources based on what is happening in the landscape of construction? But I have the answer for you. In reducing NRW, you're in essence reducing your carbon footprint. NWC being the single largest consumer of energy from the grid, just about 17,000 gigawatt per month, you can understand what that means. Any reduction in NRW, in essence, reduce your energy footprint. By reducing your energy footprint, you reduce your carbon footprint. And hopefully we can reach the stage where we can treat carbon as part of the achievement. And so it is very important to understand that as well. Importantly, when we're going to secure our water resource, secure water for the future, there must be some form of engagement with all stakeholders. And oftentimes, I believe there are assertiveness to various positions because of a lack of understanding. And so, thanks to the team, Andrew and co, we have started to be more engaging with various population groups, not just those who are more knowledgeable about a particular subject area, but every single community, bar none. We are out there. I mean, COVID caused us to be more virtual, but we are now moving into a different time where we can become a little bit more face-to-face. But those are very important in mitigating. And obviously, you would have gone through the aquifer recharge. But one thing that we had looked at is how do we revitalize some of our wells? And we were looking at about 6 dysfunctional wells, which were abandoned just because of nitrates. And for those who are biologists, etc., we know what nitrite does to lactating mothers and, well, predominantly babies, because the chemistry of it, nitrites need oxygen to oxidize, and once it gets into your bloodstream where the oxygen is, it's going to cause blue baby syndrome. So it's something that we're very conscious of, and therefore we took those systems out, but we're now looking to ensure that they become part of a backup capacity, especially during times like now when we're in the dry season. These are some of the stuff that we are also looking at. We have spoken about establishing a new water treatment plant on the Ryacobre for months, years really. It's almost right at the end of the pipe, and hopefully we can have that agreement signed off when we meet on Thursday. We are also looking to support desalination facility at Ferry. For those who know Ferry, there is what we call the Moses Lake, which is really a water stream, mixture of probably underground seawater coming in, fresh water coming down from the hills, and we want to utilize that specifically to address certain economic activities that is planned in that general area. Certainly, Roaring River down in Westmoreland is an important project for us. If densities change in a community, NWC has to look to see how it can address its supply regime in that general area, and those are geared towards that. So importantly, give you a little story. When I did my master's in water and waste engineering, my research was on wastewater reuse for irrigation. And in this country, I guess because we are predominantly African descendants, we tend to not think of wastewater and reuse as something that is a valuable resource. In certain sub-Saharan African countries, folks, it is a taboo. It's a no-no. You don't go there, except in Namibia. I've seen in Namibia the distribution system, personally saw it, the distribution system utilize 30% wastewater reuse. And it's piped in everybody's home, just like normal water. People just go about their business. The fact is, Namibia is really a desert. And when you're in certain situations, you have to find means and ways to survive. We tend to think because the rivers are always flowing, this should not be part of our mix. But for NWC, we definitely are looking at expanding Soapberry, but not just to send the 150 or 225,000 cubic meters of water when the plant is fully built out into Hunts Bay, but to actually pipe it for other purposes, whether for cooling, whether for agriculture, whatever. It needs to be utilized as a valuable resource. And that is the thrust that we are using. You may not also know that prior to JPS changing some of its generating capacity at Bogue, NWC was supplying JPS sewage effluent from its Bogue ponds in Montego Bay on a daily basis for cooling purposes. And so that is something that most persons were not aware of. And that's a demonstration of the collaborative effort between utilities and the reuse of that type of waste. Again, we have emphasized the need for NRW. It is without hesitation one of our major activity that we had to undertake. Anybody produces water and lose 70% of it, you'll be out of business. And so our thrust is to secure the capital to do this type of work. Where do I go? Okay. So while this may not necessarily be NWC's forte, rain harvesting, we do believe that it must be a legislative activity. It cannot be a policy because it must be in law because of the nature of where things are, so that rain harvesting become a compulsory action when people are doing development rather than it be an option. And so we fully support rain harvesting as part of the mix of your water resource. And it may eventually mean smaller bills to a particular community, but the fact of the matter is it may mean that I can supply more people with the difference that you're not consuming. Again, we spoke about stakeholder engagement, something that we have embraced and really ensuring that we get into as part of our DNA. You know, it's always good to say you're just producing water and you're distributing and that's it. But we want to make people be aware of the importance of the commodity and how their action affects the longevity of and the consistency of that supply. And so those are some of the things that we have embarked on. Challenges, of course, while we don't have it, we are always giving it away because Peter and Co. get a free aquifer recharge system. Obviously, for NWC to fix this problem, we need more than $3 billion US. It simply means we have just completed in a preliminary stage a island-wide NRW business case, which is requiring over $500 million US, and that's preliminary. It's not even gone to tender yet. Over $500 million US in such preliminary stage. So, like elsewhere, and I'm always saying this, water is the single most important commodity for economic growth, for public health, and for your social well-being. And it is something that ought to be prioritized above everything else. Sorry. So part of the other challenge is the spatial distribution of the sources. Obviously, it requires infrastructure to get it to where people are. And certainly, the high energy costs that NWC faces on a regular basis. Sorry that I take up more than 10 minutes, but I hope you have a good rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yes, it was more than 10 minutes, but I think it was very informative. It helped to give us a lot more additional perspective. The audience that I could see here, they certainly were engaged. So I think it was very useful coming on the heels of Andrea's presentation, because it helps to show how the various components are related and how the various partnerships work together. Although there may be some debate about fees, licenses, and permits, but I'll leave that to you and Peter to have that sidebar discussion or continue it. So next up is going to be an actual presentation about the national plan that was launched earlier this morning. And I am going to invite Mr. Jeffrey Marshall, who is the Chief Hydrologist at the Water Resources Authority. And I'm also going to invite Neo Ramsogoon, who is the hydrologist. I hope I got that right, Neo. Awesome. Who is the hydrologist at Water Resources Authority, to make this presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I want to first thank all of my team members at the Water Resources Authority, from the data unit guys who go out and collect the data, to the permits and licenses people who allocate and manage the licensing of abstractions, to my planning and investigation team members, including Ms. Ramsagoon, who do the research, including Mr. Wellington, who you saw in the video for the MAR, and of course our admin staff, the accounts and admin department who support us. Thank you guys. This is our master plan. It's not just mine, it's ours. Thank you so much for being here with it. We are here to launch the master plan, which has been a long time coming. And our presentation today will present the facts or the findings that we have. We'll begin with a brief overview of the legislation and physical setting of Jamaica that will be done by Ms. Ramsagoon, and then we'll go into the actual output of the master plan thus far. So I'll invite Ms. Ramsagoon to come and begin the presentation, and then I'll continue afterwards.
Good morning, colleagues. So the WRA is mandated under Section 2, Part 2, Section 16 of the Water Resources Act to prepare a National Water Resources Master Plan for the island. The National Water Resources Master Plan provides a roadmap for developing and managing the island's freshwater resources in a manner that promotes economic development, human health and safety, and environmental protection. The master plan identifies, describes, and inventories the occurrence, quantity, and quality of Jamaica's water resources. It inventories the current and projected water demands and describes potential sources to meet those demands. It provides guidance to public and private sector stakeholders on water quality objectives related to the use of fresh water. It evaluates the methods to meet those water quality and quantity objectives and gives a comprehensive inventory of the water resources and water demand. All right. The objectives of the master plan align or are guided by Vision 2030 and the National Water Sector Policy. Goal 4 of Vision 2030, Jamaica has a healthy natural environment, addresses the need for the sustainable management and use of the island's water, as well as the need to adapt to climate change throughout the sector. The goals and outcomes of Vision 2030 and the National Water Sector Policy strongly align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As it relates to water specifically, SDG 6 clean water and sanitation, which addresses the need to ensure access to safe water sources for all. So, a little bit about the physical setting of Jamaica. So I present to you a map here behind me. As you can see, the island is divided into 10 hydrologic basins, and the WRA has further divided these hydrologic basins into watershed management units. These watershed management units are groupings of smaller watersheds, and they are the basic hydrologic unit used for the resource and demand assessments. To note, the WMUs have been divided into sub-WMUs, and future iterations of the master plan may focus on these smaller scale management units. Studies carried out for the current master plan reveal that the existing boundaries of these WMUs and sub-WMUs will require some realignment and further assessments. All right, so here's a map of the island's hydrostratigraphy. It illustrates the distribution of the main water-bearing bodies, and the hydrostratigraphy was based on the island's intrinsic geology. So as you can see on the map, 50% of Jamaica's land area is limestone aquifer, which are comprised of rocks of the white limestone group. These limestone aquifers mainly outcrop in the northern, southern, and central WMUs. The white limestone group is made up of several limestone formations, which are karstic in nature, as is evidenced by the proliferation of faults, fractures, and sinkholes, all of which lead to underground, and yes, invisible, streams and caves, which may be highly interconnected. 25% of the land area is basal aquiclude, comprised of rocks of the yellow limestone group and Wag Water group. The yellow limestones and conglomerates of the Wag Water Formation are distributed mostly in eastern WMUs and the central and western inliers. The intrinsic nature of these basal aquicludes gave rise to dense drainage networks where the majority of the island's surface waters originate. 7 and 8% of the land area is alluvium, aquiclude, or aquifer. These deposits have varying degrees of productivity depending on the percentage of clay, sand, and gravel layers. Another 6% is limestone aquiclude, which is semi-permeable and therefore semi-productive. This is due to limited development of fractures and faults and karstification. However, as you can see on the north coast, where these limestones are distributed, these limestone aquicludes are distributed, they act as barriers to salt water intruding into the main aquifer body. Now, wetlands cover another 3% of our land area, and these areas are highly sensitive to climate change. What we do, how we manage and use our fresh water inland has direct implications for the health of these ecosystems on the coast and in the marine environment. All right. So that concludes my section. I will now hand you over to Mr. Marshall, who's going to present the resource demand assessment and the water resources management framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramsegun. That was an excellent presentation. We'll now continue with looking at the resource assessment. And that begins firstly with a quick look at the water cycle. If you want to go back to high school geography class or science geography class, look at the water cycle where water flows from rainfall coming down onto the surface and goes from there. Some of it runs off, some of it recharges, but it all goes around and around. As our technical director said earlier, the water that we have here is finite. That doesn't mean that it doesn't go away. It's conservative, but it can still be put in a place that we can't access. So we see precipitation as the main input into our water. There's runoff into rivers, there's recharge into aquifers, into the soil. There's also flow from the groundwater into the sea, and there's evapotranspiration, which happens, of course, water going back into the atmosphere through evaporation from lakes, rivers, reservoirs, or from transpiration by plants. And it all goes around and around. What matters to us is that equation of to say, how can we estimate the safe groundwater yield? By looking at the factors that we can measure, that's precipitation, minus evapotranspiration, minus recharge, minus stream flow, which includes the contributions from spring flow and base flow that maintains the river flows, and also minus subtracting the water we abstract from groundwater and estimating submarine discharge, then we can have an estimate of our groundwater safe yield. And this is, of course, a very extreme simplification of very complex processes. The measured inputs that we had for the master plan, we had estimates of precipitation, rainfall, that came from Met Office data from 1992 to 2018 as the most recent long-term period that we could get. As we get more data from Met Office, we would update that input into the master plan. We estimated evapotranspiration from daily minimum and maximum temperatures, also from Met Office all weather stations, about 77 stations island-wide. Stream flow, we took from our WRA stream flow gauges, both current gauges and historical gauges as far as possible to get as comprehensive an estimate as we could. We estimated runoff and base flow from those stream flow gauges also. Reliable yield, we took as the Q90 flow. That's the stream flow that's exceeded 90% of time of the period of record. We also estimated environmental flow and submarine discharge, trying to estimate all of those as the measured and estimated inputs for the master plan. The rainfall distribution that we see thus far is as we expect, with the majority of rainfall happening in Portland, coming from the trade winds that rise over the Blue Mountains, and there all the rainfall comes there. We know Portland is the rainy parish, so to speak. And the driest areas are in southwestern Manchester, southeastern St. Elizabeth, in the Essex Valley area. And so that's the general distribution of rainfall. We noticed that the rain seems to be a bit lower in the average than the previous master plan estimates. And also the Met Office would advise that the locus of rainfall may be shifting from Portland across to the western end of the island. Evapotranspiration, we estimated for the island, like I said, by the 77 stations, with the greatest evaporation potential being in southern St. Elizabeth and the less potential in central St. Anne. Effective, so we looked at when you see precipitation minus evaporation, that gives you an estimate of effective rainfall. That's the rainfall or the water that's available for recharge, water is available for runoff, and that rainfall is a factor. This is a rainfall, effective rainfall in inches or millimeters, I should say. And this is a factor as well of the size of the area of the WMU that is being measured at that point in time. So you can see that the largest volume of effective rainfall are on the largest WMUs. That's the Rio Bueno White River in St. Anne, the Rio Cobre Basin or WMU in St. Catherine, and the Black River WMU in St. Elizabeth as the largest ones. This is reflected also in the, moving across, there we go. This is reflected also in the total mean annual flow that's recorded by our WRA gauges, stream flow gauges for all 26 WMUs. And you see the majority of flow, the largest stream flow discharges are for the Rio Grande, for the Black River, and for the combined Rio Bueno White River WMUs. These are all coming from gauge flows, so to speak, and it shows the maximum surface water availability based on stream discharge. It should be noted that for the Rio Cobre, for the Black River and Rio Cobre WMUs, and also for the Rio Bueno WMUs, most of this water is groundwater fed high base flow streams, while for the Rio Grande, a lot of that water is surface water coming from the basal aquiclude and the high rainfall amounts that usually occur in that area. We need to acknowledge the occurrence of interbasin transfer. What does that mean? When we're looking at the surface flow of a watershed, the delineation of a watershed by surface water discharge, where you have water flowing one way over the barrier and the other way on the next side, that doesn't mean that the groundwater is following the same trend. It could very well be that the groundwater may be flowing across the surface divide. And that is something that is a challenge that needs to be acknowledged. Measuring it is a bit of a challenge, and so while we acknowledge it for this master plan, we are saying that future master plans will be looking at how best to address this particular feature. We are seeing it occurring in the Gut River WMU, for example, where there's a lot of stream flow coming from the spot measurements we see there, but the WMU itself is pretty arid, and it's also very small in area. So that water must be coming from elsewhere, and we'll be doing further research in terms of how to access that interbasin transfer. When we look at the actual water balance and figures for Jamaica, we can see that the pie chart here reflects the total input of rainfall, which is about 19,000 million cubic meters per year, and that's a lot of water. 19,515 million cubic meters per year. Of that water, almost 45% is estimated to go back as evapotranspiration. About 27% of that water is runoff as base flow and runoff, so to speak. And so about a quarter of that water is stored as groundwater. And looking at the safe yield, both of the groundwater and of the reliable yield of the surface water, we estimate that the total safe yield that's available for Jamaica at this time is about 5,872 million cubic meters per year. That's about 3.84 billion gallons per year. That's the total water that's available at this time, estimated for Jamaica's water resources. This can be further divided into what's available as surface water, which is the orange part of the chart, and groundwater, which is the blue part of the first graph, the big graph on your left-hand side. And the previous figures estimated that it was about 84% was groundwater. These revised estimates show that it's about 70% of our total available water is in the groundwater form, and therefore about 30% is available as surface water as a revised estimate that could increase as well as we increase with more data. When you compare that to what we have as our estimated demand, which is 841 million cubic meters per day, along with our current allocated consumptive demand, which is about 1,400 million cubic meters per year, we see that there appears to be sufficient water in Jamaica right now for our purposes, but as Mr. Barnett pointed out in his slide, the issue is distribution. Where is the water? Where is the demand? We can see on this slide that the demand that's available, where let me get the colors correct. The blue, the purple and the white is total safe yield, and the purple is domestic safe yield, while the blue is, let me see here. So the green is groundwater safe yield, and the blue at the end is surface water safe yield. So depending on the region that you are, you might have some areas that are more reliable for groundwater and other areas where surface water would be the most likely resource that's available. But generally speaking, as Mr. Barnett pointed out, on the north coast is where you have the most available water at this time, while at the south coast it's also available, but that's also where a lot of the demand is, which we're going to see in the next few slides. One thing that has to also be considered is the impact of climate change. According to the Climate Studies Group, we are expected to see increasing temperatures over the next 60 years, so to speak, going up to 2080. Temperatures will increase by up to 3 degrees by 2080, and also precipitation is expected to decrease significantly by 2080 also. The combination of decreased precipitation along with increased temperature, which leads to increased evapotranspiration, leads to a general decrease in the effective rain that's available. And that leads projected to significant deficits in our water resources availability by 2080 if trends continue with as business as usual. So that's the resource assessment. How is a demand assessment? Our demand was calculated, one more time, there we go. Our demand was calculated for municipal demand. That's what the NWC would need. That's what all the other water resources providers would require. For utility service areas, which are urban areas, anywhere that's within 100 meters of a pipe distribution system, and non-utility service areas that are not within 100 meters of a pipe distribution system, and those people would fall under the 50 liter per day minimum policy as outlined by the water sector policy. Domestic demand we calculated at about 227 liters per person per day in urban areas. That's 50 gallons per day as used by the NWC. We also estimated commercial and industrial demand, commercial demand being for commercial activities, businesses, commercial shopping centers, etc., and institutional demand being demand for hospitals, schools, and other institutions as being 25%, an estimate of 25% of the calculated municipal demand. For tourism demand, we estimated about 849 liters per hotel room, assuming a capacity of 66%. The cruise ship demand, we assume for people on cruise ships coming off, but that's usually covered by municipal demand because if you weren't aware, many of the cruise ships get their water in Jamaica. I know that's a big selling point for NWC. They're very proud that when the ships come to Jamaica, they want Jamaican water to purchase. It's going to be the best water they ever had, and we can endorse that completely. The irrigation demand was estimated for the type of crop that's been irrigated, as well as for the location, and also for the demand for aquaculture. And industrial demand was taken from for the abstraction licenses for registered industrial users such as JPS and bauxite companies, etc., looking at the rise in GDP, calculating that rise in demand. The demand per sector, when we look at the distribution across the island, you see that, again, the demand is reflected heavily on the south coast where the majority of the population lives, and where a lot of the irrigation activity lives also. The two largest circles you see are in the Milk River and the Rio Cobre basins, or WMUs, based mostly on irrigation demand. That's the green color is irrigation demand. Municipal demand for public supply is the blue, and that is the largest in the Kingston Basin. You can see the smaller one right below Kingston. That's the demand there, as municipal water being the biggest demand for that area. So again, we see where the demand is on the south coast, where the majority of people, activities, irrigation are, and on the north coast from Hanover across to Portland, the total demand is relatively small compared to the total demand on the south coast. Again, for climate change, we're expecting with population increase, rising industrial activities, rising agricultural activities also to provide food for all the burgeoning population. We are also predicting a significant increase in water demand over the next 60 years based on current trends and projections. When we compare the available water resources to the available water demand, what do we get? Interestingly, groundwater remaining the invisible resource and remaining the largest available water resource by straight numbers is actually about 46 to 47% of our allocated total consumption. This is mainly because while groundwater is relatively abundant, it's also very economically prohibitive, or it's expensive to get. You have to drill the well, you have to pump the well, it requires a lot of energy, and it's easier a lot of times to take water that's on the surface and use it. That's why you saw NWC pointing out that they have 162 wells versus over 233 rivers and surface water sources. The consumptive allocation, like I said, is about 52% in favor of surface water sources for the volume and 43% for the wells. And then when we look at the water that's available after we account for the consumptive allocation, we see that there is still significant water resources available based on the resources. However, just because it says available in terms of straight data, there may be challenges in accessing that. For example, in Manchester, it's limestone aquifer in Manchester, but the groundwater is deep because it's a very high elevation. So is it economically feasible to drill a well in Manchester to get water? That has yet to be seen. So that has to be considered in terms of your locations for well drilling and the availability of water for consumption therein. Next slide. And looking at the water balance, we can see that after everything is said and done, the point remains that the availability of water after all the consumptive allocations have been applied, the water is most available right now on the north coast, and the water in the south coast that's available has been more or less utilized, and the availability is relatively limited and needs to be properly managed to ensure that it is available for future usage, especially with the projecting decline in water coming in the next few years. And that states here. So if the trends continue as they are with the predicted availability of water and predicted increase in temperature and decrease in rainfall, we will most likely be seeing a significant and steady decline in water resources availability up to 2080 if things do not change. And that is seen here in the national water balance also. Deficits are running, we are projected to be significant in 2080 if things remain as they are. Looking at the management framework, what is available for us to do to really manage our water resources? Under the Water Resources Act, we have the overall management responsibility as RRA. We have the facility from the Act to establish a Water Resources Advisory Committee, to regulate abstraction of water, to do the master plan, to declare control areas as necessary for both emergency use during drought time, to declare water quality control areas. We are the managers, arbitrators of water conflicts as well, if as needs be, and we also control and protect underground water, underground well drilling and well drilling licensing, so to speak. We also enforce regulatory controls for any breach of the Water Resources Act. So that's what the Act provides as right now for the Water Resources Authority to do. And as stated by Ms. Spencer in her presentation, the water sector, the integrated water resources management is a crucial part of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And they are in the process of establishing these integrated water resources management councils, multidisciplinary, multisectorial, and the RRA endorses and supports this initiative 100%. Some of the management alternatives that we can do are on the supply side and the demand side. And some of these were mentioned earlier. For example, on supply side management, we can increase water storage. That you can do that personally, where most persons now have black tanks on their homes to provide a backup water storage in the events that NWC has unfortunately been impacted in their service. There are also the parts of rainwater harvesting as encouraged to be moving from policy to legislation. That's something that can be looked at. And persons who live in St. Elizabeth and Manchester know that rainwater harvesting is the main source of water provision for them at that point in time. It's something that can be implemented to really cut down on the pressure on the existing water resources if we do that rainwater harvesting. What can be said about managed artificial recharge that has not already been said, except to say that it is the only one of its kind in the Caribbean, and I think that the RRA, NWC, and Rural Water should be very proud of this achievement, and I want to acknowledge Mr. Fernandez, Pastor Fernandez, who had conceptualized and pushed for it to happen. It's something that will be a significant support to our water resources management in the Rio Cobre Basin for now and the foreseeable future. And desalination is a technology that has been improving. The energy costs have been going down. The environmental impacts of the brine have been looking at trying better ways to better manage that. And as time goes on, we see that it will become a more integral part of relieving the pressure, so to speak, on our existing water resources, especially as those resources may decline due to climate change. From the demand side management, an increased efficiency in water usage is essential, where we as consumers say, okay, how best can we cut down on our water usage? Can we install water saving devices? Can we use non-potable water for non-potable usages? Rather than using drinking water that will be used to flush the toilet or wash the car, can we instead harvest rainwater to do those kind of things? Can we recycle and reuse wastewater? Mr. Barnett pointed out the impact of Soapberry recycling that water. I know in Singapore they take the water and treat their water to such a level that the wastewater effluent is used in semiconductor processing. It's that pure. And that wastewater, that effluent, if you want to call it effluent, is actually put back in the reservoir for future usage. I personally drank a bottle down there and it tasted just like Catherine's Peak water. So it's important to consider the fact that when you have water, 90% of the water we use goes back as wastewater. And so rather than taking wastewater as a waste, it's important and time for us to really take it as a resource. The volume-based fee, inter-WBU transfer is something that can be used to take the water from where it's available and bring it to where it may be more needed. That's happening right now in Kingston, where at least 3 WMUs, the Yalas pipeline, the Hermitage, which takes water from the Wagwater WMU, and water coming from Rio Cobre and Tullow Springs in St. Catherine, all come into Kingston to supply water there. So that can be considered also once the technology and energy usage is there. What the volume-based fee is there as a means of not just getting money, so to speak, but also encouraging abstractors to consider the water they're using and to pay for the water that they actually use. So rather than reserving 1,000 cubic meters per day when they're only using 500 and paying for that 1,000 cubic meters, they're encouraged to, register for the 500 that they're using and pay only for that 500. There could be water markets as a potential suggestion for supply side management, where persons with licenses or with permits can say, all right, I have this available, I'm willing to sell or trade this to other abstractors as needed. That's one potential, that's detailed more in the master plan, that can be used as a means of demand side management. And of course also the water fund or payment for ecosystem services, where users contribute towards different facilities that will protect our water resources. Future initiatives that are supported by the master plan and that should be considered and will be considered by the WRA includes increasing the WRA's capacity in all aspects, technological, human resources, technical, and research capacities, and to also increase the focus on water quality monitoring. We're currently doing that with isotope hydrology projects using stable isotope hydrology and building up the ambient water quality standard committee, assuming that my committee members here. We're also proposing to increase our data collection. You cannot go wrong by collecting more data. And as such, when we have more technology in water resource collection, water resources monitoring, then we are more equipped to measure and give more advice as to how our water resources are going, because we have the real-time advantage of seeing what's happening here, what's happening there. This would include installing new flow stations, stream flow stations, including installing more groundwater monitoring wells where there aren't any right now, so we can really see what's happening. And also, we see the gaps that might be here in the master plan, where there's a lot of estimates. Then there needs to be further research to narrow those gaps, to provide more accurate estimates of the data, and so that when we come another 5 years with another revision of the master plan, we're able to say, this was good, but this is now better, and this is providing more information to our policymakers to say we can act with more assurance of knowing what's there for us to manage and not manage. In closing, I would just like to give a brief overview of our monitoring network as a Water Resources Authority. We can see here our surface monitoring network across the island, where the red triangles are current streamflow monitoring stations, along with historical stations and spot measurement stations. Ideally, in an ideal world, all of these would be red dots, and there will be additional red dots as well. Hopefully we will get there one day so we can have more data to provide better assessments. And for our groundwater monitoring network, we can see here and all of the known wells in Jamaica. You see the spread reflecting what was spoken of by Ms. Ramsagoon in the limestone and the agricultural activities that were done in St. Catherine and Clarendon. and also the significant well presence in St. Elizabeth and Trelawney and St. James, and other places that have limestone aquifer but no wells as yet. Exploration will be needed to see what are the available resources in that area. But the groundwater monitoring network is strong, it can be improved, and further resources will help us to make that a reality. I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to continued support in the Water Resources Assessment of Jamaica.
Thank you, Neil and Jeffrey, for that very comprehensive presentation. I think what stood out for me was the fact that we're seeing data in action. So it's data collected, it's data analyzed, and it's data used in terms of seeing what we have available, what we need, and how to bridge that gap. It's also looking at going forward, how we can continue to build on the master plans of the future. So this one has built on what came before, and there's room to continue to improve going forward. So thank you very much for that. So we just got a lot of information. We got policy information, we got information from the NWC, we got information from the WRA. And I suspect that some of you may have some questions. So I'm going to invite, for those persons who are physically here with us, if you have any questions, we invite you to go to the microphone that's right in the center of the room and ask your question from that point. For those who have joined us virtually, we ask that you use the raise hand feature if you have a question, and we will acknowledge you, and we'll actually be able to project your video and your audio so that you can directly ask the question. If for any reason you're virtual and you choose not to ask live and wish instead to use a chat feature, that will be communicated to us and we'll answer those questions that way. So the floor is open to any questions, clarifications, anything from any of our presenters. Please just make your way to the mic if you're in the room, and or virtual participants, please go ahead and indicate raise hand or send us your question in the chat. When you're going to ask your question, if possible, would you please just introduce yourself, give us your name, if you wish, your organization as well, and then go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Doreen Prendergast, and I'm the Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, with responsibility for housing and urban renewal. I just want to say that I was truly happy to hear the presentation and the master plan done by the WRA. It was very, very comprehensive and interesting. I guess as a geographer, I would find that interesting. But what I want to ask is, I know that in the Act, provisions are made for an area to be declared an emergency area. And I'd like to find out, have you ever had any reason to declare any area an emergency area? What would have led to you determining that this area is to be considered an emergency area? And what would be the antecedent actions that would be required to get this area out of an emergency area?
The Act provides the requirements that will be needed for same. Usually that will be done by the minister upon advice from the authority itself. So if that was brought to the minister saying that based on if it's like a drought condition, emergency conditions, that would determine the need for that. Then the board would bring that to the minister for that to be implemented, so to speak. I am not aware if that has been done since the promulgation of the Act from 1996 to the present. I am not aware that that has been done. So that's what I know at this point in time.
Oh, okay. And my next question, I think it has to do, is Mr. Barnett's question. I'd like to find out this current status of the non-revenue water program. I know at one point in time there was talk about taking it into Manchester as well. Where are you with it now? Has it started in Portmore? What exactly is happening? And is it an ongoing program or it has a lifetime?
What I will ask is that our presenters come and join us on stage and just have a seat up here for the duration of the question and answer period. Andrew, would you also join us, please? Thank you.
Okay. So, just a quick update. The most recent NRW program was executed in Kingston and part of St. Andrew. And I use meaning the urban areas. That program was for 5 years, started in 2020, but because of COVID and some other extenuating circumstances, it was extended up to September 2021. So as it is now, that NRW program has ended. I briefly mentioned some of the results. We were able to reduce NRW down to, and again, we have to be careful. In the industry, we always like the particular number in a particular way, but if I tell you 44%, you're going to say, Lord. But it has to be taken in context with other aspects. So we were able to reduce NRW from about 63% down to about 43%. But again, NRW, how it is measured, is a rolling 12-month average. It's not an instantaneous take of an assessment. And so, but in addition to that, we were able to impact some what we call socially challenged areas, where people were now starting to get, well, they were always getting water, but NWC now start to get some revenue from those areas. We were able to do a number of things. I think it's about 160 discrete metering areas, establish pressure zones that will involve monitoring and control pressures within the network, reduces loss. You would also recognize that NWC, by virtue of ensuring that it doesn't incur great losses or breakage on its network, does not guarantee supplying any complex beyond the first floor with water. Oftentimes that is a contentious issue, but it is a decision that has to be taken whether I dig up the road that creates its own issues for you, the traveling public, or you deal with getting the water into your apartment beyond the second floor. We rather the latter rather than the former. But some other output, we were able to increase service supply from 18 hours up to 23.5, as I indicated before. We installed, well, it was an initial part of the program, but we have extended that to go full circle in solid-state electronic meters, and these meters eventually, once we can get the right technology service provider on board, will be able to communicate with you even before you get your bills. What are the other achievements? And we save some money by reducing our electricity bill at certain facilities. So NRW, we were able to save over $280,000 US annually by taking out Avondale Well, cut down Mullines Road Booster Station, take out Long Mountain down the road there, and so forth. Sorry that I'm not able to give it to you in a more cogent way, but I think it captures some of the output from the activity. Just to say, in reference to the other part of your question, CTD, we are now in Portmore doing an NRW activity in Portmore. It's a 5-year program. Started last year. We are now just about 1 year, or going into 1 year of that program. And the intention is to reduce NRW down to 30%. I just add to say that out of a business case that informed the establishment of the Raya Cobre treatment plant, which I mentioned earlier, NRW is seen as a risk to that project because it's a PPP, and therefore we had no choice in mitigating that risk but to attack NRW. Thirdly, we are actually looking at an island-wide NRW program. We just completed, as I indicated earlier as well, sign off on the business case. We are now to look at the getting cabinet's approval, etc., to move to the next level. That program is going to cost us more than $500 million US. So we hope we will get the support of everybody to pay for it. Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for that question and for the responses. Well, those two questions and the responses. I did receive a question from someone, and just to let you know that the presentations, etc., will be available on the WRA's YouTube page once we're finished here. So the recording of the session then will be available there, and it will also be sent to everyone who has registered. So that information will be accessible after the forum has ended. I understand that we do have a question from the chat, so I'll ask Rochelle if she can come forward and share that with us, please.
Question and comments from Mr. Evan Caetano from the IDB. His comments are: many thanks for the presentations, particularly from the NWC and of course the WRA. Happy to know that the Water Resources Development Master Plan has been updated. The Water Resources Development Master Plan is indeed a model for other Caribbean countries. Now to his question, he says, can the WRA elaborate a bit on how the environmental demand for water was calculated?
Thank you for that question. The environmental demand is usually demand that is assessed for what's needed to keep an ecosystem going, for ecosystem services. There are various ideas and research methodologies to determine that. For us, we took the relatively simple method of estimating it as being 60% of the 7-day minimum average flow over a 10-year return period. So we just took the lowest flow that we have over that period of record for over 10 years, the lowest flow that's there, and about 60% of that saying that's what would be an estimate for the environmental demand for this master plan. Future research will see if that can be expanded or further analyzed, but that's what we use for the master plan right now.
Thank you very much. We have a gentleman who has another question for us. Please remember to share name and, if you wish, your organization, and then ask your question. Thank you.
I am Richard Megu, currently with Rose Hall Development Limited. I just wanted Mark to elaborate on something more, because one may leave this presentation feeling that the onus is on NWC to fix leaky pipes and all of that stuff to address the NRW issue in its entirety. However, there's another component, and I'd like for him to speak a little bit about not just the technical losses, but the commercial losses.
Yes, you know, for public disclosure and full transparency, Megu worked with NWC for a number of years. So I see why he's putting me under pressure. But yes, so, you know, you're taking me back to school a little bit. But NRW really, as you have indicated, there are two broad components. There are the physical losses. And the physical losses is what I would have spoken about. What takes place in the network. And the network really includes your pipeline, your pumps, your reservoirs. So on any of those, you have losses. It's a physical loss. But there is the other component of commercial losses, or the apparent losses, which in industry it is called. And this is where it gets interesting. So oftentimes, and I usually like to make these as practical as possible. Oftentimes, you will query the accuracy of a meter. Just a little story. Most of the meters that NWC usually install, which are those bronze-looking meters, you remember them? Right. So those meters actually slow down over a period of time. And I give you another real example. If you look on your faucet, or in your kettle, you see a buildup of calcium. The same thing occurs in the meter. Once that, I'm just going to use the simple word, propellers start to slow down, you're consuming more than you're actually being billed for. And eventually the meter will malfunction. So when you have losses because of inaccurate meters, unmetered supplies, which is, as we have found out, well, it's not really a eureka moment, but we know that they consume more. We just now measure it accurately. Each person that has an unmetered supply consume anywhere between 3 to 8 times as much as you would have a metered connection. That's add to your losses. And of course, some of the other things, when persons go and tap into the fire hydrant, take water from the fire hydrant, it's something that I don't know. It occurs, it's part of my losses. And for those ingenious customers, and we do have some of them, who intend to just not pay for the quantum of water that they consume, but decided that they want to have a bypass on their installation, it's loss as well for the utility. So there are a number of little things that goes into establishing an NRW, and by giving you all these details, it shows you the complexity of the activity that has to be undertaken. It's not an easy job, but that's why we're here. And the whole idea is, how do we ensure that we reduce to the very minimum our commercial losses? And we know once you put in a new installation, a new pipeline, it inherently has a certain percentage of loss because you have joints to deal with, probably 5% at minimum. Is how do you ensure that you are within that, that threshold? So thanks, Megu, for the question. I hope I give you a little bit more details in terms of the intricacies of non-revenue water. I hope this does not become an NWC question and answer.
No, I was just asking what sort of monitoring goes into particularly monitoring the commercial entities. For from time to time we hear on the news where NWC may come across a big entity that is bypassing the regular system.
So careful assessment is done on your meter reading. And this is one of the reasons why we are more keen to do fixed network meter reading, meaning we have started it, those persons who live in Long Mountain as domestic really, but I'll take on the commercial. We don't need to leave the office to read your meter. So when you call and say, but I didn't see a meter reader, I don't need to come out to read the meter. I get the information straight from Long Mountain through an antenna into my billing system. And it depends on the time of day. Today is not a good one. I could read meter all the way over into Portmore. But for commercial customers, CTD, it's really a comparative assessment of each month's billing or consumption. And once you see that anomaly, you go and you check. And it's a physical check. And if the anomaly continues, then it warrants a particular inspection. And that inspection may require digging up the whole connection, just to see what is happening. So it's not, we don't have the type of system where you run a cable along your pipeline as it is in some developed country, and you can stay in some controls area and know exactly what is happening. We don't have that. We don't have the money to put that in, period. Okay?
Thank you very much for that question and response. Are there any more questions? Anyone in the room? Anyone online? Anybody in the chat? Okay, so I think that is a wrap on that question and answer section. Thank you very much, Mark and Jeffrey, for joining us up here. What I will do is I will invite, oh no, you can. I'll invite our members in the audience, if you just want to stand up and stretch, 5 minutes while we prepare for the panel discussion. So just 5 minutes, don't go far, just stand and stretch if you need to, please. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, I'm going to ask our panelists if they could begin making their way forward to the front of the room to join me up here. So, Mr. Peter Clark, Mr. Glaister Cunningham, and Mr. Joseph Giles. Please make your way this way. Okay, colleagues, we're about to resume. It's come to my attention that we did have a few more, or at least one more question as it relates to the master plan. So I'm going to ask Jeffrey and Neil if you would come forward again and just field these questions before we move into the panel, please. And if there are any other questions that we may have inadvertently missed, now is your 5-minute window to submit those.
To go ahead onto.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Basil Fernandez, and I don't think I need any further introduction. I would just like to congratulate the Water Resources Authority on the presentation made this morning. Excuse me, and to say that I'm quite happy at the legacy that has been left behind at the WRA. And Mr. Marshall has moved up from being the piano player to the chief hydrologist. And has certainly shown his worth in the many different areas that he has been given responsibility and research in the water resources sector and in the WRA. I also want to congratulate Mr. Mark Barnett on the NRW that was carried out. I remember distinctly when the NRW was first announced and the contract with Maya was signed. Mark had a tremendous blitz on the media who was against spending this amount of money and didn't believe that there would be any savings coming from this expenditure. I gave Mark strong support at the time, and I think it was worth it. I must tell Mark that I have been having good water pressure where I live, and I think that comes about because of the systems that have been put in place and the non-NRW reduction that has taken place. So again, congratulations is due to Mark. I think it's very important for us to understand that water resources management, and especially the management of groundwater, which as you say is invisible, is basically not just for the Water Resources Authority, but involves both the utilities as well as the environmental agencies. And I was really hoping to see something more from the National Environment and Planning Agency's involvement in and possibly the Forestry Department involvement in this celebration of World Water Day. So I think that was an omission. I just have one question from Mr. Marshall, and if he can just tell me what is the position now with basins 1, 2, and 3 in terms of their resource availability, because all the previous assessments that we had done had indicated that there were going to be severe problems, especially in basin 2, which is the basin 2, 3, and 4, sorry. And there were going to be severe problems, especially in basin 3, where we had declared a moratorium on new abstractions many years ago. But in closing, I just want to say congratulations again to WRA and to all the persons who have facilitated it. And I really do hope that the managing directors of the past, like myself and Thomas, will get a complimentary copy of the Water Resources Master Plan. Thank you all very much.
1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez.
2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4.
Okay, all right. The feedback is gone now. So, if I got you correctly, you asked about basins 2, 3, and 4, which is the Kingston Basin, Rio Kobe Basin, and the Rio Minho basins. All of those are indeed, when you read the master plan itself, which will be presented, the actual document when it's presented later this week, it goes into further detail, which I couldn't present right now, but it showed that the available water that is there is limited. We were recommended that even though it says available, there is still some leeway there in terms of what's been accounted for in terms of the ungauged streams, for one, the allocation that is there, and a better idea of what's actually been abstracted. One of the limitations that we have is the input of actual reported abstraction data, where that data is unfortunately limited. It's improved much in recent times. The Permits Department has become much more stringent in requiring the reporting of abstraction data. But from a long-term aspect, that impact of what's been abstracted is still a bit outstanding. So while the available resources may say it's in a decent condition, the actual abstraction, the observed over abstraction, as Mr. Barnett pointed out in his presentation, that can be occurring from different abstractors, would have an impact on the available water resources that are there. So while we have accounted for that as far as possible, to further quantify the gaps and the impacts of over-abstraction that is not reported is one of the gaps that will be narrowed in future abstractions. And the availability, we are not saying that it's a free-for-all in these areas, but we're saying we need to actually go more discreetly into those areas, focusing on the sub-WMUs for future usage, for future assessments rather, and then look at it more minutely, saying what's happening with these wells here, the rainfall here, and let's really see what's happening at the smaller scale that will be more applicable for the underground persons. So that's where that is right now.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Fernandez, and thanks for the response, Jeffrey. I understand that at this point we have received no additional questions, so with acknowledgement that we are running behind time, I would like us to go ahead and get into our panel discussion. So we've started to touch on this concept of securing water supply for the future, and obviously the importance of groundwater. It's been that theme that's been running throughout. And our panelists, Mr. Peter Clark, Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority, Mr. Glaister Cunningham, Vice President, Investment and Performance Monitoring at the National Water Commission, and Mr. Joseph Giles, Chief Executive Officer of the National Irrigation Commission, now join us to discuss a little bit more in terms of their respective entities and the general water sector, what we are looking at in terms of the future of our water supply. So what I will invite, and I'm going to do this in reverse order to the listing, so I'm going to ask each panelist to give us a very brief opening remark or a few opening remarks. And I'm going to start with Joseph, then I'm going to ask Glaister, and then I'm going to ask Peter. So just opening remarks very briefly, and then we'll get into a few questions. And audience, both here and virtually, if there are any questions that you wish to be answered, please again indicate to us so that we can factor those in. Okay? Thank you. Joseph?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Well, the NIC provide irrigation service right throughout the length and breadth of this country. I won't claim to boast like Mark that we are in every single household. We are just in the farming communities. However, we span over 10,000 hectares throughout Jamaica, and we are fast improving on that, where we have a number of irrigation development schemes that are currently on the way. We use about 60 million cubic meters of the water that Peter charges us for annually. And just like Mark too, we have to pay. And interestingly, even though we pay Peter for the water, he has asked us to give back some to him for that aquifer recharge, Mark. So we pay and we still give back to them. But we have over 250 kilometers of open canal network. We have over 200 kilometers of pipeline network. We have a customer base of over 5,000-6,000 persons, our farmers, and is still growing. I am not in the position as Mark. I am accounting for just about 73% of the water that we produce, and we are still trying to improve on that. I'm sure when the question and answer time comes around, people will ask. But we believe in sustainable development. We have installed just under 600 kilowatt of solar system. And over the last 2 years, we have been able to save about $40 million annually from our electricity consumption because of this initiative. We also have started to outfit all our pumps, premium efficiency motors, where you just about 90%. And we have installed at our pumping facilities a number of variable frequency drives that also have reduced our electricity consumption. So we are on the verge to be that entity that, as our tagline say, is making the difference. It is far from what we want to do because we do have old infrastructure as well. You're talking about our canals are over 60 years in terms of age. Some of our pumping equipment are older than me, and I'm not young as I look. So I'll rest at that for now.
Thank you. Is it still morning? Good afternoon, everyone. The danger of speaking after my president is you're not left with much to say. His passion and his knowledge of the NWC is so deep and wide that you probably have a full understanding of the NWC already. Just to describe, we have over 1,000 water supply and treatment facilities, as you have heard, over 11,000 kilometers of pipeline, 60-something wastewater treatment plants with plans for expansion across the island. You would be aware of our mandate. You would have heard about the USAs, where in, let's call it urban areas, NWC is mandated to provide services to 85% of the population by 2030, in the overarching goal of having universal supply by that timeline. So we continue to strive towards that. The three major themes in securing water supply would be one of overall conservation of existing supply, renewal and replacement of facilities, and of course, in terms of on the sewer side, to provide improve wastewater services in areas where it makes sense, which is typically the urban areas. Central sewage systems, I should say. So I would probably leave it to the panel discussion to make any more comments about what the NWC plans to do. But thank you for having us.
Well, good morning, and thank everyone for being here, first of all. I am really happy to see you. Hello? Good morning. Hello? Okay, I was saying, first of all, I'm very happy to see everybody here this morning and to recognize all the persons that are online, that are participating in today's forum. It has been a plan of ours to have our stakeholders join us, and we're glad that you could make it. Apart from all that has been said about the Water Resources Authority, of course, you all know by now that we are responsible for the management of water resources, for its allocation, for the management of the resource, for the distribution. And coming out of that is a responsibility that we accept, that in the main, that raw water that is available, while it is on properties and with property owners, that we have a stake in it as a secondary owner. And it is recognizing the importance of that stake, of that charge that we've given ourselves, that we move each day towards making ourselves as sustainable as possible with regards to water resources. I'm very glad that we could launch the Water Resources Master Plan today, and I'm hoping that it being a master plan will be the foundation for other plans, for development plans, for parish plans, for NWC plans, whoever has plans, that this will be a foundation plan that will be drawn upon. And I'm expecting that to be so. Yes, we collaborate with a number of agencies, and I have to also say that apart from what you do know, we have to be, for instance, we are called upon or we are integral in decisions that's made by people who you wouldn't expect. For instance, the National Solid Waste Management Agency, if they want to build a new a waste transfer station, for instance, they have to consult with us. NEPA, through their process of dealing with applications, we're a part of the team that help them to make decisions with regards to developments of certain sizes and regards to developments in certain areas. It has been pointed out by Ms. Spencer this morning that one of the things that is being looked at on the policy level are revisions to the Water Resources Act and revisions to the Flood Control Act. And we look forward to that. It will mean more responsibility for the Water Resources Authority when that comes on stream. But it is anticipated that with the expertise that we have at the Water Resources Authority, we will be able to make a vital and positive contribution to how we deal with flooding, to how we respond to flooding, and to how we plan to get away from areas that could possibly be flooded out. But that is very important, and we look forward to being a part of that process in a greater capacity. I will leave it right there in terms of what we're about, and we'll bring out what we're planning as we speak.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for those opening remarks. Joseph, you mentioned that there have been some activities that have been undertaken to improve efficiency. You've gone the route of solar. In terms of the conversion that we're seeing, the useful arable land, the general increased demand for irrigation, etc., are there any additional changes to the current business model that you would like to elaborate on, share with us? I know that there has been also the Essex Valley Development Project. Perhaps you would like to speak to us a little bit about that in terms of the persons who will be served by that and what that looks like for the NIC in the future.
Okay, so the NIC has taken a posture that all irrigation systems that are being developed are developed from here henceforth that will have a solar component to it. The Essex Valley has a 32 megawatt solar system that is being constructed as well. That will allow, well, the irrigation tariffs are so set by government, but that will reduce the efficiency in terms of energy for that scheme by about 32%. How that will transfer hand to the farmers, that's another thing. That is a government decision. I can't say about that. We have, in excess, like in Clarendon, we have 80 miles of open canal system. That is extremely inefficient. Over the years, we have started to change out those canals and put those into pipelines. The intention in the long term is that we'll change all these open canal system into pressurized system, and that is far more efficient. The Essex Valley system, as we speak, that is, we're expecting in excess of 1,000 farmers to be coming on stream. That project, even though behind, is slated to be completed at the end of next year, and we are just awaiting the pipes to start the construction. Alongside that as well, a parallel project, we have the SPAD, that is the southern section of Clarendon and St. Catherine, and those two projects will be putting over 1,000 hectares into agricultural production. I hasten to say there's a project that we are just trying to fine-tune the funding, and that is to take water from the Black River. That project is a biggie. You're talking about over 4,000 hectares will be expected to put into agricultural production, and farmers, you're talking about in excess of 2,500 farmers. We have done the preliminary designs. I believe we're looking at the funding for that project. That project is not only an agricultural project. I know Mark is very enthused about that because there will be some discussion in terms of how that water will be shared. And it's the harsh reality we are using. We're talking about groundwater. They need groundwater for domestic purposes. So if we take water from the Black River, we'll have to have the discussion how we will exchange, because that is also a tourism belt, and the project is slated for other users to benefit, because that area suffer water scarcity. So things are looking brighter ahead in terms of how water distribution will be on that side.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Joseph. And certainly in addition to the sharing of water for the various activities that are necessary, I know there certainly is going to be quite a bit of regard for the ecosystem services that would be provided in that area by the Black River, and there will have to be a very careful balancing of the use of the resources, the abstraction of the resources under that, with maintaining those services for Jamaica and its people. So do you have any idea in terms of a timeline?
Well, let me hasten to say, and I note that you're from the environmental side, so as we speak, an EIA is being done because we want to ensure that that project is sustainable. The project is slated to last for 8 years, and you're talking about from ground zero, where we would have gotten budget support to do some cadastral surveys. So that is what we are expecting to start in the new financial year. But we are mindful that it has to be sustainable. The Black River is used for many other purposes, so also that is factored in the design as well. So it is something that is a game changer, but even though it is a game changer, we want it to be sustainable, that we don't have any challenge with a particular entity.
Thank you for that additional information, Joseph. Glaister, I'm coming to you with a couple of questions. I know in Mark's presentation, he did mention the high cost of energy in terms of your activities. I know it's probably been touched on a little bit, but what is the direction of the NWC in terms of renewable energy? Where are you now? Where are you going? Is that something that you're exploring more fully to help to offset some of the costs, or what is being explored to potentially offset those energy costs?
Thank you. Absolutely. Renewable energy, I think for all entities, is becoming more and more of an attractive option given the cost of energy. A quick anecdote. Under the KSA NRW program, President would have mentioned the savings in energy. Those savings, we saved between 2018 and 2021, 16% in lowering of our energy usage, our kilowatt hour usage. But our bills still went up by 7%. So you can work out the mathematics of what it would have been had we not done that. You would have heard in the news recently at between 25 and 30% increase in our energy costs between November of last year and December. It's fallen a little bit January and February, but who is to tell what will happen given, things going on in Europe now and all of that. So that has put, I wouldn't say refocused, but certainly brought it up on the priority list in terms of our pursuit of renewable energy options. We've been doing it steadily. Over the past couple of years, we have a couple of bids actually going through projects going through the procurement process as we speak. And we've completed some programs. For example, the Portmore office in St. Catherine is on solar at the moment, and a few others. So yes, in short, we are pursuing it actively now. We're talking to a few multilateral agencies as well for certain programs and access to funds that are available, grants, which is a good thing, to be able to pursue some of the initiatives that we are exploring.
Thank you very much for that. Follow-up question, and this is kind of going to the other side of things now for NWC, and it was mentioned in the presentation and in the discussions, but in addition to the water supply, there's also the sanitation component. And I'm wondering if perhaps you could give us a little bit more insight in terms of the direction that we're going in the future to try to prompt some additional measures in that respect that can further protect or aid in the protection of our groundwater supplies? Where is NWC looking to go with that in the future?
We're also doing significant investment on the sanitation side. You would have heard, again, speaking of the president, our plans to expand our plan to expand, to actually double the capacity of the Soapberry wastewater treatment plant from its current 75,000 meter cube a day to 150,000. That project is very interesting in that it will be looking at the full circle of things. We're looking to see how we can use renewables as much as possible to both provide the energy source for the plant, but perhaps any excess can be used to wheel. We are seeking to use the water that is treated. We're trying to treat it to a particular level that can either be used in other applications, for example, irrigation if it's necessary. The possible Caymanas special economic zone industries might be able to use that water in their processes. We're looking possibly into using the biogas from the plant itself, possibly for energy production as well. So that project is particularly exciting in terms of the things that are possible with it. There are other initiatives that we are pursuing now, including for Falmouth, which is a big growing almost city, let's say, with the cruise ship, the new cruise ship terminal, with all the interest for tourism there, for doing a centralized sewerage system there. And we're also looking at other programs at different areas on the south coast of the island. We understand that the importance, it's obviously quite an expensive undertaking to provide centralized sewerage, but there are many projects that are in our capital investment plan now going for 2030 and beyond.
All right, thank you. Okay, Peter, back to you. So the master plan, we just launched it. We just got quite a bit of information about it. What's next in terms of what has been presented and shared today? What do you see next for the WRA in light of that information? Where do we go in the future?
Okay, thanks, Alison. Well, as I said in my opening remarks, the master plan, first and foremost, will itself be a foundation for other plans. And that is absolutely critical, that it is taken seriously. It is absolutely critical that the players that have access to it utilize that access. In going forward and in looking at the plan, and in Jeffrey's presentation and in Nia's presentation, you'd have seen color changes. Remember that we used an event horizon up to 2080. And in looking at that event horizon, we saw the color changes of different conditions. We saw the color changes for demand, the color changes for resources, all right? And the picture that is painted clearly is not that things are going to be stable. As has been pointed out, we are for the first time taking into consideration the impact of climate change. And that in and of itself presents an overall picture of declining resources. What it means is that the water resources going forward, or the water as we know it as a resource going forward, or a concept of what is the resource, will have to change. What it means is that what we're using as the resource and what we will have to eventually be looking at producing fresh water, as opposed to abstracting or just accessing fresh water. Glaister has pointed out the fact that with the expansion of Soapberry, for instance, what could happen with wastewater. It is fully endorsed that there is worth of water in wastewater, and so we will have to look at producing fresh water from wastewater. We've spoken about desalination, and it is not right now the the go-to or the default resource. But with time, it also will be a part of our default resources. So in order to preserve what we have, in order to reserve what we have, then it means that we will have to be looking to these alternative measures of production of fresh water. And you might ask why, for instance, would we want to produce if we have a resource? I always tell people that it's the same reason why the US imports oil instead of using their oil. Because they would like to know that somewhere down the line they have a cushion. And in the same way, we have to always preserve our resources so that we do also have that cushion. And then having the cushion will give those who come after us, it will give them a little bit of latitude with regards to how they can eventually exploit that resource. But we have to present that opportunity for them. So in going forward, looking down the line, yes, we will be producing more fresh water than how we're just abstracting fresh water at this time.
Thank you for that, MD. In terms of what has been presented as well for the master plan, and right now there are certain policies and procedures in place in terms of even the licensing, the permitting fees, allocations, etc. Is that something that over time is going to potentially be impacted by the projections in the master plan? I know it's not something you can definitively answer, but what is your sense going forward in terms of those policies for us as regulators at the WRA?
Well, not looking at it as a policy, but looking at it as a I won't say business either, because we're not in it for the business. But the fact is that eventually, if you are abstracting less for some reason, and those fees are based on abstraction, and then if somebody is now basically producing water from a source that is external to it being its natural freshwater resource, then it would mean that they would be offsetting or providing for themselves an alternative measure that would not be pulling on a taxable resource. And so that is quite likely to happen. You also apparently were intimating on if, for instance, these fees could change. All fees can change, clearly. Our abstractors may not be very welcoming of that, but the fact is that is a fact of life. But generally speaking, because of what I just spoke about in terms of the matter of producing, when a user is doing their own production and not drawing on a freshwater resource, then it would mean that they would have been withdrawing in some fashion from the matter of those fees.
Okay, thanks for that, MD. So both Glista and Peter touched on this concept of wastewater and finding a way to utilize that as a resource, no longer considering it something that we immediately discard and forget about. Joseph, question for you in terms of NIC. What is the thinking of NIC in terms of wastewater for crop irrigation, for example?
So, as a country, we have just talked and we talk about this, but it has reached the point, it is at this point that we need to take a decision. Are we going to use water? And let us be frank, Mark is candid when he speaks. Are we going to use the water from Southbury for irrigation purposes? Or can it be used? The simple answer is yes, but there are a number of issues that we need to take into consideration if we're going to contemplate using the water from Southbury. One, the first thing we need to get into the psyche of the Jamaican people. We need to look at the culture. As a nation, we don't believe in that. So we'll have to work on that. That's the first area we need to work on. We need to craft good education program to ensure that persons, that it is safe. Secondly, we have to be mindful as a nation, we don't do well in terms of maintenance. If we're gonna use that water, we have to have a robust, almost perfect maintenance program to ensure that the very day when we start to use that water, if something should go wrong with one of the pump, there is enough redundancy to ensure that the water can still be supplied. The other issue we are talking about, when you're using this water for agricultural purposes, number of persons, you would want to stay away from leafy vegetables. You want to use that on stuff like lawns, you want to use those on fruit trees, and when we had sugarcane predominantly. So we have to overcome those hurdles. And thirdly, if you're gonna take water from the lower end of the spectrum to bring it to the higher end, that also requires a lot of energy conservation. So we have to put all of these in the mix to ensure that that is a sustainable project where the redundancy is there, that because you're talking about quality issues. And if for any reason that plant is down, you can't be sending water that is not safe for people to just interact with. So those are stuff that we really need to get, those hurdles, we have to cross those hurdles. But the short answer to your question, it is a possibility, and the water is there, so we need to put all the factors in play and get ahead with that project.
Thank you for that, Joseph. Peter, I know you had a follow-on.
Yes, for sure, we would encourage that activity. What it would mean is that water that is being drawn, for instance, by the NIC from wells to irrigate farms could then now be diverted into domestic needs. So that right away is a positive for us. Also, it would then become a savings in terms of saving on resources, because you would be using a resource that normally you'd be calling a waste, that you'd be dumping and that you'd be throwing away. So in that sense, it becomes a saving for us or for the country in general. I agree that we have to be cautious with the plants, and for sure there is agricultural activity that is on the horizon, and these are not necessarily unwelcome to wastewater being the source. For instance, if I have heard talk of bringing back our Sea Island cotton, I've heard talk of what is to be expanded with castor oil beans, and so on. And because of the fact that, generally speaking, these are largely non-consumable, then it means that the farmers themselves, I would hope, would be able to appreciate the value, appreciate the worth, and be a part of I would say, take it up, and be acceptable, find it acceptable for their own needs. Yes, we have to do a little bit of education and a bit of prompting with regards to that. But I think that if we really tell the truth about what is happening and what is the likelihood of where our resources can end up, then that decision or the acceptance may be a little bit more welcoming.
Just had just one quick comment on it. Just in terms of the social education, I think it's a challenge, but I don't think it's an insurmountable one. I think if we have a collaborative approach to the message, anybody that did the water cycle, there's no new water on the planet, right? All the water we have has been here since the beginning. And all of it, it's a natural process versus an artificial one. And if we can get that message across, that we're just doing it a little bit more quickly, I think in time we could get the public to understand where we're going and what the value of it is and where it is used elsewhere in the world, and you have quite very healthy people all over the place. So just wanted to add that one point.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I have been hearing the discussion about wastewater more and more, and it certainly is useful to have the perspectives of the various players in this sector, all endorsing it as something that we should certainly explore. We should consider it a potential resource, and we should look at how going forward it can be utilized for the benefit of us as a nation. I know that we're long over our originally allocated time. I did receive a question in the chat, and I'm going to read that, and I'll ask any of our panelists, whoever wants to take it, whoever may be able to respond, to go right ahead. The question is as follows. With regards to the public-private participation or partnership, perhaps, that was introduced some years ago, what happened to this initiative and what policies have been put in place by OUR and MEGJC to implement these opportunities? I'm not sure. Is that something any of you is familiar with and could speak to?
I can speak to part of it.
Okay.
The policy part I would leave to policy folk.
Okay, great.
You want to take your part first, or?
No, well, I would just like to say that PPPs are not dead. They are very much alive. Exactly what Joe has been talking about with regards to what would be happening with Black River. And we've been working with Joseph for about 3 or 4 years now, and I won't name the company, but they have been doing what they need to do in the background to secure the funding from their own parent banks in their own country for that. What is happening with the National Water Commission and the Rio Kobe plant is essentially a PPP. And it's just to say that they are happening. No, most of these projects, for them to really be viable for that external partner, they have to be very large projects. And the commitment on our side, and when I say our, I mean the Jamaican side, the commitment on the Jamaican side will require sometimes the provision of land and property, the provision of easements, all of these sorts of things. Those things take time to get sorted out, but they are happening.
So if anyone from DBJ was here, they would tell you that Jamaica. So first, they would tell you that PPPs are definitely not dead, and Jamaica is fourth in Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of PPP uptake, and we're quite proud of that. The NWC itself, as a percentage of the portfolio or the pipeline of PPP projects, I think we're one of the leading organizations. Peter just mentioned the Rio Kobe water treatment, 50 million gallon at the water treatment plant. Correct. And we're also, the soapberry that I just mentioned, we're in the middle of negotiations now with the consultant to do the business case for that expansion, which will be pursued quite likely in some form as a PPP. The business case that was just mentioned that we signed off on the All Island NRW program is another potential PPP. So there's quite a robust pipeline of projects that are being pursued seeking to leverage private sector financing. We've been to a number of conferences over the last 2 years, and the interest both locally and internationally in investment in Jamaica and in investment in the water sector is very, very strong.
I'll tell you even further. Jeffrey and myself have a meeting coming up on Thursday, and that meeting is for a major PPP, which will be addressing not just a water issue, but the water energy nexus. And coming out of that, it is anticipated that clearly the NWC will be a great beneficiary on the water side, and of course the public will be the beneficiary on the energy side, because it would mean that some energy, the more renewable energy that we can use, then the more positively your bill is, the normal power service bill is affected. And this is some, as a matter of fact, you're in that meeting Thursday too, right? So it's very much alive.
Okay, thank you for that, gentlemen. So I have 2 additional questions, so I'm just going to read those quickly. How does the master plan, its outlook to 2080, and the spatial changes of water availability direct growth or change in water use or groundwater protection with respect to housing settlements and types of agriculture? Would any of you be able to just speak briefly to that question, please? I know. Okay, let me go again. In terms of the master plan, its outlook going all the way to 2080, and the spatial changes in water availability, how does that direct growth or water use and water protection, groundwater protection specifically, especially as it relates to housing settlements and various types of agriculture?
Well, much of that we've answered when we spoke about the matter of depleting resources, because the master plan does give that indication of depletion of water resources over time, over that event horizon. And in responding to that, that we discussed or mentioned the matter of basically producing fresh water from alternative sources. In terms of the build out of housing and so on, what they're really asking then is, are we looking at an increase on the demand side? And obviously there will be an increase on the demand side. The funny thing that we don't really consider a lot when we're looking on the demand side is, let us say for instance you have a community of 1 million persons, and then you build something in an area and it can accommodate suddenly 500,000 persons. What we must remember is that 500,000 persons didn't just get born to go there. What it means is that who you have here, some of them are migrating into that. So don't think that your demand, when you see the developments, are instantly expanding in such a fashion. What you're doing is you're relocating your demand. Now, the question that you must ask, and the question that we must answer, is if that development is in a space that is supported by water resources at that space, or how difficult it will be to support it. Right? So while demand will grow, it is always an incremental growth. All right? So you'll see 40 high-rises going up in Kingston. What it means is that there are 40, the accommodation for that amount of people moving there. But they've moved from somewhere. So they have reduced that demand somewhere to now move here. All right? So it is just a matter now of that infrastructure being in place to support that change.
CTD said the question is long, but I'm going to answer that question very shortly. Oftentimes, when you hear about water usage, water being waste, the only entities you hear name called is NWC or NIC. And what we have not done as a nation is look about the usage from the consumption side. And we're talking about water use efficiency. Persons must realize that they have the responsibility to be efficient just like the entities. And if you look what each person is using as against what they ought to use, you will see the disparity is even far greater than the entity. So we need to look on both sides. So all we're talking about is water use efficiency there, and persons need to just realize that. So that's a short answer to that long question.
Thank you very much. CTD, are you able to, wait. Okay, actually hold on a moment because I'm not seeing a mic right there.
I wanted to find out from Mr. Giles. Well, I want to preface it by saying COVID has brought sharply to the fore the need for us to pay attention to our food security. And I must commend you because I know that you are putting in some measures in place to bring greater efficiency to how you deliver your irrigation water. However, I want to know how has the rapid expansion of housing development on the St. Catherine Plains leading into Clarendon, how has that impacted your irrigation capabilities?
That, you know, my answer to that, CTD, is that all views have to contend. There is the need for housing stock. There is the need for agricultural lands because as population grow, you need more food. Those are policy directive. What I will say, as a country, we need to start to look on how the housing stocks are constructed. I believe we need to start to look at high-rise buildings and provide more housing for people while still leaving arable lands that are easily mechanized for agricultural use. That is as much as I can say as it relates to that.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, last question. Are there any plans for exploring new sources of groundwater?
I'm not sure that there are any new sources of groundwater. We're 4,411 square miles, and we've done extensive mapping. We are very confident of where our aquifers are, and we're confident of our assessments of the balance within these aquifers and the yield and so on. So I can't say in that simple sense, or even in a very complex sense, that there's any groundwater to be found. So that is where that is.
Okay, thank you for that, MD. All right, I think we're at the end of our discussion. I am not seeing any more questions, and I would like to take the opportunity to hold on, we have one comment.
I'd like Glester's help with this, because I just want to talk a little bit about the solar issue, because it has become quite fashionable to talk about, given the fact that energy costs are high. And a lot of time people will ask a question about why doesn't NWC implement, use solar more, instead of complaining. But it is a little bit more complex than that, I believe, because as Mark had indicated, NWC is the largest consumer of power from JPS. So the power requirements for NWC is huge. And therefore, in order to supply that, right, and in addition to that, the facilities are dispersed all over the island. You really need to have a system where you can produce it at one point and move it from point A to point B. That means you would have to have a sort of distribution system to when you generate the power at point A. Otherwise, you'd have to build separate facilities at each entity, which is really, the footprint is huge, which would be problematic. So I don't know if Glester or Mark wants to go a little bit more into that, because it is a bit more complex than we make it out to be. And I don't want anybody to leave here without understanding the complexities.
You know, you were at the right university in terms of a workplace. Megu. Hello? Oh, all right. So I'm going to bail out my vice president because I think the whole renewable energy has really been driven from my office per se, because sometimes you have to just take the bull by the horn to lead certain things to make sure that it happens. Because of the various intricacies and doors outside of NWC that has to be, I don't want to say knocked down or kicked down, but you have to do certain things. So, Sir Megu, you're absolutely correct. First of all, people need to understand that solar is not as efficient as it is made out to be. Solar is an intermittent energy source. For NWC, fortuitously or unfortunately, our facilities footprint, and just think of this for a moment. When water supply systems were being constructed, they were just being constructed to support the size of the water treatment facility or the size of the relief station or the pumping station. So there was no expanse of land that were sequestered or secured to erect those facilities. So invariably, most of the land that surrounds a water treatment plant or whatever the facility is owned by others. And so to get access to that is another problem. But where we do have those expanse of land, we are utilizing them. Glacier would have mentioned certain procurement in place. So this is what we're doing for solar. And just to give you the full 100 of what is happening. So we started small. We put solar on our Oxford Road, and a lot of you may not know that we have a office at Oxford Road. We put solar there. We put solar at our Portmore office. We put solar to run our Hamilton Gardens wastewater pumping station. We're now putting solar at Forest Hills, which is about 350 plus kilowatt hour, which is really what could be sized there, albeit, and importantly what Megu indicated, to run an NWC facility similar to what NIC would experience, we have low voltage. And you'll say, low voltage, what does that mean? It means 415 volts at 3-phase. What you have at home is probably 220 single phase. Totally different ball game altogether. So we're at Forest Hills. In the procurement, we have for solar to fully solarize our Constant Spring water treatment plant, including pumping that goes up to Stillwell Road over to Norbrook. That will help us, but guess what? These are the smaller facilities. They may produce a lot of water, but their consumption is low in terms of energy. So here comes the big ticket locations. Pepper, Gutters, Spur Tree. There's no land there for NWC. Let's say there's no land owned by NWC to put up a solar farm. The only place, I believe, based on a recent assessment, that we could do solar farm is Peppers. And we attempted to secure the land. The owner doesn't necessarily was able to give us that land or sell us that land. And unless we then go to the ministry and says, let's do compulsory acquisition. No, that's not something that is good, but we can do it. And it may create bad relationship between you as a utility and the people in the neighborhood. So you put that against what do you really do? We did a further assessment, and the possibility may exist that we may be able to generate wind up at Spur Tree. We're looking at that. And you ask, so why don't we push it and get it done? So in our own assessment, a single wind turbine will generate far more energy than what I would need at my Spur Tree facility. Now, in the industry, and this is knowledge, folks, there is no set wheeling rate. That has not been established yet. So all you hear the argument about wheeling, etc. I may be able to generate energy, but it may be more economical to take the energy from the grid rather than wheel it to my facility. This is just how the entire industry is set up. So while we may look at wind for that location, we're still looking at the possibility of solar just the same. Fast forward into corporate area. And unfortunately, but my statement may not please a lot of persons. As Giles said, I'm the one who speaks frankly, and it may come as being upsetting to some. But in 2017, 2018, we attempted to put a huge solar farm on the Mona Reservoir. And it came out of the idea, I don't know if you all recall, in 2014, 2015, we had a drought. A lot of people were affected. And in the same time, California was having a drought. California used some black balls on their reservoir. Somebody sent me the information. I work out the costs for installing those balls. Mona is about 100 acres of land as it is. And when I worked it out, it was costing probably close to about 80 million Jamaican dollars just to purchase balls to put on the Mona Reservoir. Now, think about it. Poor country like us, 80 millions. So maybe we look at something else. So there was the opportunity that came that look at, why don't I lease the water surface? This is not selling or anything, lease the water surface. That has never happened in Jamaica yet. You lease land, you don't lease water surface. And we entertain the idea is to really put 45 megawatt of solar power with about 5 megawatt of firm capacity to NWC, which is really what my national demand is on any one day. But the question is, while I can use it at the Mona facility and possible Hope, because they are very close by, how do I then exert or extract the benefit from that renewable energy? And here comes the whole issue of wheeling. If we don't have a set pricing or a range of price for wheeling, it makes it difficult for an enterprise like NWC that has capacity to install renewables some places, but its production and utilize centers are dispersed island-wide. Nonetheless, we're pursuing it because we see a greater good in renewable for the national benefit, because once you can have a sustained renewable energy input, the possibility, and I'm very careful with my words, the possibility exists that your overall energy price may go down. But to get to that point is the problem. There's too much obstacle in government to really get productive projects going. And I'm one of them who are suffering, well, not personally, but NWC, suffering from the bureaucracy to get real project that is going to impact not just the utility itself, but nationally, both from an environmental perspective and both for sustaining how we live. Too difficult. Absolutely too difficult. And it's like each step of the way, persons who deal with it are helpless. So, I don't know if I answer your question, Megu, but I think I give a broad scope of NWC's effort in terms of implementing renewable energy in its in its consumption mix. It is going to happen. It's going to happen slow. Our target is to possibly reduce by about 2 to 5% our overall consumption from the grid, which is predominantly fossil fuel. But if we can do that, we will be stepping in the right direction and hoping other big, audacious projects come on stream. Hope I helped you out good enough.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Thank you for the response, Mark. That was very comprehensive. I think it did give us a better picture of what the situation is in terms of the process to transition. Okay, so I'm going to, at this point, say thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you to you, our audience, both here and virtually. And I think I have one more notice. There is a representative from the Forestry Department here, right over there. Some of you may be aware that yesterday was International Day of Forests. So there are some seedlings that are available for those of you who may be interested. So please mosey on over to the Forestry Department representative. And you can have that conversation about which seedlings are available, etc., and take your seedling home. It's not too late to contribute. I am now going to say thank you also to all of you for the opportunity to walk you through today's proceedings. Thank you to all the respective teams that made this possible. It was a lot of hard work, not only for today, but a lot of the work that went into the things that were presented today. That took a lot of time. So thank you. And I am going to now hand over to the MD of the Water Resources Authority to give the official vote of thanks. MD, over to you. And Glaister and Joseph, if you wish, you can head on down. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Let me say thank you to everybody who turned out today. First of all, of course, thank you to our CTD, Yannick Watson. Thank you to our Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Water. Minister without portfolio with responsibility for water in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Senator Matthew Samuda. We're also joined by Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, and I want to say thank you to her. Thank you to our chairwoman, Nadine Spence, who was here to join us today. And to our presenters, our many presenters, to Mark Barnett, President of the NWC, to Andrea Spencer from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, to Glaister Cunningham, who joined us from the National Water Commission, VP Cunningham, CEO Giles, of course, my colleague and very good friend, Arlie Thompson. Thank you for joining us from Rural Water Supply Limited. I must say thank you to Jeffrey Marshall, Nia Ramsagoon, who gave a good presentation, a very good presentation today. And then I must say, I must extend further thanks to the entire Water Resources Authority team with regards to the to bringing for us today and this Water Resources Master Plan. It was an excellent team effort. There were many technical persons who were involved, from the data unit, from the permits and licensing unit, from the abstraction unit, and of course our GIS team, and of course the support team on the other side, on the administrative side, who gave whatever support was necessary to make it happen so much. I must say thank you, and I must acknowledge the work that was put in over these last couple of years to bring us to where we are today. I must say thank you to the organizing team who put together today's event, not just from the Water Resources Authority, but from the National Water Commission, from MEGJC, and that I know that you've spent quite a few Fridays for the last probably 2 months, organizing and planning how we'll be getting today to be a successful day. And I think that I can say that it has been a very successful day for us. And I thank you for the effort that was put in that regard. I must say thank you to the media for being here. We fully appreciate the every effort to promulgate this water resources master plan and to promulgate the efforts that we've been making on other strides and on other fronts with regards to protecting and managing water resources. And every time that we get the opportunity to spread that out there, we are very appreciative of that. So thank you to the media for being here today. Thank you to my colleagues, so many colleagues that are here. Some I haven't seen in a long time. Ayante is here. I mean, Ayante and I worked at Early and Associates a few years ago. Eleanor, I was here, my colleagues from NEPA. All of you, I must say, thank you for joining us today. I hope that you found today fruitful. I hope you found it informative. And at the end of the day, I can say that I am proud of the success that we've had with today and with the efforts that we have put in to make us here, to bring us to this place and to this time and to this what we're able to demonstrate. Thank you so very much. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and that will be it. Thank you.